That was scary for a second there. Yeah, that's why it took me so long. I was trying to, you know, get the itched, you know what I'm saying? Just trying to get everything, all the ish figured out. So, is the music super loud again, or is it pretty much okay? It's pretty much okay, because there's not a whole lot more I can do. Oh my lord. Anyway, so today I was gonna try and draw a little bit, even though, you know, I'm no artiste at all. Yeah. Yeah. That's gonna bother the crap out of me. Some things that once I start streaming, it doesn't let me like change anything. But anyway, it's fine. There's nothing detrimental that needs to be changed. It's just my fake OCD kicking in. Yes, thank you. Appreciate that. So yeah, we're gonna actually watch some creepypasta. But the new rule is we don't do that until we have a sound alert. We can't have sound alerts on YouTube, so yeah, we're just gonna casually transition, I guess. But yeah, so we're gonna watch a creepypasta, and I'm gonna, while we're watching, I'm going to draw a panda, I guess. I think. I don't know, that's my general idea. I don't know why I feel like I'm forgetting something. This feeling I'm forgetting something. I'm getting lost in the music. Alright, cool. I think we're good to start. Alright, let's switch to the creepypasta we're gonna watch today. And it's pretty good. It's one of my favorite ones, actually. So, yeah, have fun with that.
You ever get out of high school and realize you have no idea what the hell you want to do with your life? Turns out, just kind of waiting and seeing where life takes you can really only get you so far. You're
Also,
always
audio
told,
levels.
"Oh, what do you want to do when you get out of high school?" Simple enough question. Well, turns out it's a lot harder to figure that shit out when you don't really think of it the entire time you're in high school. So what do when walking down that aisle and accepting your diploma and suddenly you realize you have no clue what you want to do with your life? My name is Travis, and when I graduated high school, I had no idea what the hell I wanted to do with my life. College? Not appealing to me. Job? Even less appealing. So what did I do with all my government-mandated education? Stayed home, sleeping all day, and gaming all night. Typical deadbeat shit. And like any loving and supportive parents, my lovely mom and dad threatened to kick me out on my ass unless I found something to make of my life. So I weighed my options. College? I had no idea what to study. The nearest college was several miles away. I had no scholarship opportunities. The idea of being in debt for the majority of my life was very unappealing. Job, I get home tired and probably have to listen to some asshole boss. So, it was a job I ended up choosing. Although trying
you
to
thought
find
he
any
meant
kind
what?
of employment in my town was near impossible. Unless I wanted to work at a factory for the rest of my life, I really had
He
to
meant marriage
expand my
out.
search
Oh.
from fast food to garbage man, throwing my application to any place that had a help wanted sign. And that's how I ended up at Old King Creole's. Honestly, I don't remember even applying here. I just got a call one day when I was laying in bed reading a book. My phone pulled me away from what I was doing, and I sighed as I stared at the unfamiliar number. The person behind the line talked with a heavy old Southern accent, but I could tell how excited he was to meet me in person. And I was excited to finally shove it in my parents' faces that I had made something with my life.
What should this panda be
Working
doing?
at a voodoo shop.
Should I
Living the dream, right?
I guess I should make
Of
pumpkins.
course, if you asked me now what I would have chosen, college is looking a bit more optimal. If only a little bit. Now look, we've all heard the story of bosses from hell and shitty working conditions for shit pay. And to some extent, I get that. I'll get into my boss in a second. I really don't hate this place. The customers piss me off more than anything. Let me explain why, by explaining my job. I work at Old King Creole's half-priced voodoo shop. Quite the mouthful, huh? It's this glorified shack full to the brim with freaky dolls and spooky cobwebs.
Oh yeah.
Lovely place, really. Especially at night when all the desperate people come in begging for wishes or potions. Oh yeah,
Yeah, I'm
we
gonna
give
try.
out free wishes. Like, really real wishes. But I don't handle that, so I'm not going to talk much about them. Just remember, if you ever come in and ask for a wish, please think it through thoroughly. I'm so tired of wiping up the counter after a bad wish gets granted. The main thing I deal with
I guess
is
we can
doll
make grass
sales and
first.
potions. Need that wart removed. Got a great potion for that. You a shitty parent and forgot little Jimmy's birthday. One of these dolls should do it. Just don't come crying to me when Jimmy's soul gets trapped in the doll.
Oh no.
We have a strict no return policy. Is it a scam? No. You bought it without asking if it could suck up Jimmy's soul.
Oh
Can't
no.
really do much about that now, can I?
Oh no.
Potions are more flexible. The only time I've seen it go bad was a weight loss potion. Had to sell the angry lady a potion to get rid of all her excess skin. I don't know what she expected. She was like 300 pounds. Did she think all that skin was going to go somewhere? The way I check into work is also pretty interesting, if I can call it that. I show up on time, or 5 minutes late without fail, and stab a needle into a voodoo doll on the counter. It's not meant to look like anyone since it's a blank template, but still doesn't make it any less weird.
You run out of
I
animation
swear that thing
creepypastas?
looks at me
No.
whenever I'm on my phone. When
We still have
nobody's in the
them.
shop.
I
Have
just
got
really
nothing
like
to
this
do.
creepypasta.
What do you want me to do? Wipe the counter down for the millionth time? I've tried, man. The dust always comes back.
I'm trying to figure
Without
out how to
fail.
draw
You
grass.
turn around for half of a second.
But I don't
and
want it
it's
to look
back.
like, you know,
It's gotten to the point where I just leave it and
preschooler
draw
just did
things in it.
this, you know.
What else? Oh yeah, we have a basement I'm never allowed to go into. I was told
You
by
know,
my boss,
I want
I'll
to do
talk
better
about
than
him
that.
soon, calm your horses, that I'm never allowed down there. Not that I even want to go down there.
I gotta
The
Google
loud knocking
grass.
coming from it and the crying has pretty well and truly kept me away from it. Hey, don't you start judging me about it. If you're so damn curious, you go down there if you're so damn tough. I'm just the cashier. If I'm told not to go down into the freaky murder basement, I ain't going down there. What else happens here? Well, the place seemingly stocks itself, so that's pretty cool. Sometimes. This place can get so boring when nobody is here that I wish I could restock the shelves or the potions. Something, man. I get paid to sit behind the counter and ring up things people want to buy. Simple as that. I've been working here for about 2 months, and man, does it feel like I've been here for decades. Each of my days takes like 3 mother territory. Though, I guess he's got her beat, 'cause he's real. And his mouth is sewn up. Same with his throat and neck, like he's got stitches all around his neck. Sometimes when he turns his head too quickly, you can see it wobble and his stitches about to snap. It's gross. He's pretty cool, all things said, though he definitely doesn't have a concept
Straight
of
line of
personal
curve line with
space.
these. Yeah.
When I walked into work for my first day, he came out of God knows where and grabbed my hand and put his face like a good 3 inches away from mine. One thing that strikes you about KC, apart from the stitches and button eyes, is how pale he is. Like, I'm no bronze god myself, but KC is about as pale as white chalk. Like, it's unreal. When I first met him, I thought he was wearing paint or something. But nope, that's his skin. I think, anyway. If you look at him long enough, you kind of see his skin cracking.
I actually
like
wasn't sure if you guys even liked the animated ones. I thought,
I don't know.
I guess I could have
All
put
in
a
all,
vote
he
up.
isn't such a bad boss.
Didn't know if
He
it
pays
was
well
like
enough. I get $20 an hour to just sit
repetitive
here
or
and
boring
ring up
or
an
whatever.
occasional customer. You got a wish? Sorry, that's KC's department. And of course, if you mess up your wish and end up as a bloody mess on the floor and counter, guess what poor idiot has to clean that up? Yours truly. So please, if you ever show up to Old King Creole's half-priced voodoo shop, think your stupid wishes through. Now, if you'll excuse me, my break is done and that thing in the basement is really banging on the door. And that doll on the counter is really giving me the stink eye. If anything else interesting happens here, I'll let you
That doll on
guys
the
know.
corner is giving me the stink eye. Hold up, Alice, isn't there a way for this
Hello again. I
model
thought
to
I'd tell
hold?
you all a story from my second week of
pen?
working at this half-priced voodoo shop.
Let me see.
Well, I had punched in like any other day before,
Key
stabbing
mouse
a
pin
pin into
tablet,
that
but it
doll
doesn't have a.
template
Oh,
that
there
just
we go.
stares at me all day from its spot on the counter. At this point, I was still
There's the
struggling in
pin.
vain to keep the counter clean, but alas, to no avail. So I resigned myself to just mess around on my phone until I saw some form of life. Travis, my boy, came the voice of my boss and owner of this fine
I want y'all to
establishment,
see me drawing.
King
That's
Creole
all.
himself.
I'm like
How's
animated
this
because they
job
got visual,
treating
but a lot
you?
of them are very weak
Yeah,
speak, so it's
his
50-50.
stitched up
That's what I'm
lips curled into
saying.
a smile as he came around the
Like,
counter and wrapped
if we
an
could
arm around
find
me, causing me a decent
a
amount of
creepypasta
discomfort.
that's animated.
As I've mentioned before, King
Here's my thing. If we can find a creepypasta that's animated and long, it's not like a 5-second thing, you know? And it like lasts for like 20 minutes and it's animated like well. Not pineapple pen. Dear Jesus. Then I'm cool with it. But it just feels like recently all the animated ones are like super, like they have some shock value here and there, but they're kind of like simple and repetitive and are not really like, oh my gosh, this is so cool type of thing. Like these stories are way better, but like you said, they're not animated. I mean, there are other ones we could watch where the guy is like talking to you, so you can like see his hands moving around. This one's still really good though. So if you want one to listen to as you sleep, here's the link to that. It won't save you from the pineapple pen. It's okay. But if you guys want visuals, I can pick one of his other ones. I just don't think he does visuals for the really long ones. So the person we're looking at is called Lighthouse Horror. He's really cool. I really like him. I found a cage in my grandfather's basement. Sounds entertaining. But here's the thing. I think his older stuff, he doesn't have him talking because a lot of his older stuff. If you're in the woods alone and see you don't breathe. What? I never seen him in the corner before. Talking. That's interesting. Wanna try that one? Don't need to switch mid-story. Now Alice will be sad. I sent the link. She can watch it. Never heard the end of the position marker. The potion marker. The potion maker. Hey, listen. It's a great story if you're willing to listen to it. Because I will gladly put it back on. But let me look at this real quick.
I was called out on an emergency dive on the 12th of April 2013.
Looks like a
Back then, I usually did forensic and rescue
a
dives.
Zoom video. I've never seen him do it like that before. That's so weird. What the frick? What the frickin' frack? Anyway, okay, let's go back to what we were listening to then. They have videos here and there.
Of my boss and owner of this fine establishment, King Creole himself. "How's this job been treating you?" he asked, his stitched up lips curled into a smile as he came around the counter and wrapped an arm around me, causing me a decent amount of discomfort. As I've mentioned before, King Creole has button eyes, a stitched up mouth, and a head being kept on his shoulders by some stitches. He always wears a nice black suit with a dark purple tie and a top hat. Yes, even indoors. And yes, I know he looks ridiculous, but look man, I'm trying to keep this job as long as possible, so don't blow this for me. "It's going okay, Mr. Creole," I said awkwardly. Still, at this point, weirded out by his looks and his unnaturally chalk-white skin. He nodded happily at me and gave me a good smack on the back.
I thought he was gonna say smack on the butt. I was like, hold up a second, what kind of
fantastic to hear,
stabbing Smith is
Now
this?
remember, they come asking for a wish, you just come fetch old King Creole, and I'll be right on over. He hummed happily, finally letting go of me and standing back. I nodded, since that was really the only thing I didn't have to do here. "By the way, I think one of the dolls is missing," I pointed out to him, pointing towards the wall of voodoo dolls that goes from the floor to the ceiling. Each of them is of a different design and of a different person, so if one goes missing, there's usually a reason. "Oh,
This baby keeps stepping all over me, yikes.
He hummed, almost happily, as his button eyes turned back to me.
Turn the
He
baby
gave me
off.
a yellow tooth smile
Flip
behind
the
his
switch.
stitches. "I expect a
Hit the power
customer
button.
will come in today." He chuckled, walking past me and patting me on the shoulder. His hand was as cold as ice. Giving a bit of a shiver as he vanished to the office in the back, I sat my butt down on the uncomfortable stool that sat behind the counter,
Bouncing
went
off
back
the
to
wall.
looking at my phone,
Yeah,
periodically
give her some
picking
baby
at the doll
drugs.
on the counter and turning it back over whenever it somehow managed to turn and look at me. About an hour into my shift, the old rusty bell on the door clanged, signaling me to get off my phone as I quickly hit it and looked over to the customer. It was a girl, about my age, maybe a year older. She looked around at the place.
Oh, also trolls, that's why I'm drawing, because I wanted you to have some entertainment, since I know that this wasn't animated, so that's why I set up my drawing tablet for you.
As she came up to the counter.
Give her a shot of whiskey.
No!
No!
Half-priced voodoo shop. I said
Take out
in
the
my
batteries.
best, I do actually want to be here voice. "What can I help you with?" I asked her.
Don't
Putting
poison
my
the
hands on
child.
counter and looking down to make sure it wasn't too dusty. "Hi, the sign outside said free wishes," she asked me.
Alright, listen
With a
close.
raised brow. She seemed
Ish
like
about to
a
hit the fan
sporty
in the
kind of
story.
person. How did I know this? Because she was wearing workout gear in the middle of fall. She obviously was jogging and saw our sign. "How exactly does that work?" she asked me. "Yeah, I gotta go get my boss to handle that. Wait here while I go get him?" I asked her.
Alright, so
and
the
she
grass
nodded,
is grassing,
still a bit
y'all.
skeptical about this place. And I don't really blame her about that at all, if I'm being honest.
So
Getting
I'm gonna
off my
add,
stool,
you know,
I stretched a bit and made my way over
a
to
lighter
the king's
one
office,
and a slightly darker one.
flinching when whatever was in the basement started pounding on the door again. At this point, I was still afraid of it, so I just quickly ran past it into the boss man's office, knocking 3 times like I was always told to do. "Hey, Mr. Creole, we have
Is
somebody
that too
here
late?
asking about a wish," I said.
Ooh,
I
this is
received
good
silence from the office.
right there.
Raising a brow at that, I tried again, knocking another 3 times to get a response. Although the response I got was the girl at the counter screaming. Turning quickly, I saw that it was just my
Gotta add
boss
some
standing at the
depth,
counter.
you know?
Looking back at the office and over to the counter, I scratched my head at how the hell he could have gotten over there so quickly, but ultimately resigned myself to it just being not worth my time to think about. "I do apologize for startling you, darling," King Creole hummed, taking his hat off and putting it to his chest. "I do forget
Guess I'll
sometimes
put like
that
brown
my
at the
appearance
bottom.
does frighten the faint of heart." He hummed with a chuckle. Yeah, I had had the same reaction as that girl when I'd first seen him. "It's a little early for Halloween," the girl pouted, backing up from him, and I can imagine really rethinking the idea of coming in here. I wouldn't have blamed her if she had left right there. Would have saved me the trouble of cleaning up afterwards. "What can I do for you, Melissa?" my
Not
boss
him
asked,
knowing her
putting
name.
his hat back on that messy mat of black hair he owned and putting his hands out in front of him, obviously throwing the girl off by knowing her name. She looked to me as if to see if I was having the same reaction. I just shrugged at her. He did the same thing to me, so I didn't know what she wanted. "Well," she began, looking back at him and pursing her lips in thought. "What does asking for a wish entail?" she asked him, crossing her arms at him. Not a bad question to ask, in my own honest opinion. Well, you asked little old me for a wish, and I grant it for you. No strings attached." He hummed, holding his hands up and showing that some strings dangled down from his gloved fingers. "I do ask that you think through your wish very thoroughly. Wishes
So now I
have a
was thinking
very
about
bad
adding some
tendency
pumpkins.
of backfiring," he said with a sad tone. I looked at my boss with a raised brow. That was the first time I'd seen him show any kind of emotion that wasn't, well, creepy happy is the best way to describe him.
Creepy happy.
Seemingly sensing I was staring at him, his attention turned to me. "Travis, can you please get something out of my office?" he asked with a hum. I looked up at him, confused, since I was never
Oh,
really
now I need to
allowed
Google
in there.
pumpkins. I don't know how
But
to draw a
hey,
pumpkin. Hold
he
up.
pays me, so I might as well do it, right?
There's nothing that
"Sure.
easy. Exactly.
What do you need?" I asked, looking to the counter and noticing that stupid doll was staring at me again. "Get the brown satchel bag that's under the desk. I'll handle young Miss Melissa," he hummed, turning his attention back to her, his hands coming down to the dusty counter and drumming his hands on them. "Sure thing, sir." I shrugged, giving one last look to the girl before turning and going to his office. Not before that thing in the basement started banging again and startled me, quickly rushing past it and into his office. King Creole's office was surprisingly spotless. I say that because the entire shop is covered in dust and cobwebs,
Okay.
so seeing such a nice office was definitely jarring. I know you
Okay.
guys are expecting severed heads and dead bodies everywhere, but really he just has a desk and some photos on
Okay.
the wall. All of them are scratched out though,
Okay.
so I
I
didn't
think I
really
can
pay
figure
too much attention to it. Going over to his desk and looking underneath it, I did indeed see the satchel bag he told me to fetch. Taking it and heading out of his office, I came back to Melissa shaking his gloved hand, and both of their attentions turned to me. "Travis, good boy. You found it,"
Not good,
he
boy.
hummed as he motioned for me to come closer to him. I did, and handed him the satchel. With a cheerful grin on his stitched-up mouth, he quickly slammed it down on the counter, kicking up dust and sending both me and Melissa into a coughing fit. He opened it up and searched inside of it for a bit, his smile growing wider and seemingly about to bust his stitches when he pulled out exactly what he was looking for, pulling out a small can of what looked like skincare cream. "Now then, your exact wish was that you never wanted acne problems ever again, correct?" he asked the girl, tilting his head and waiting for an answer. From my angle at his side, I could notice that his head really strained the stitches on his neck. That would have been funny to see his head go rolling around the shop. Melissa looked uncomfortable, obviously self-conscious about my being there. But she nodded to the voodoo salesman, who in turn handed her the cream. She looked down at it and then up to him, a quizzical look on her face. "Well, go on, darling. Try it out," Creole said, a smile still on his face. Melissa looked down at it and uncapped it. I tried to peek from my spot next to Creole from behind the counter into the jar. It was just a normal white cream, like any other kind of skincare product. Melissa sighed as she dipped her finger into the cream and got a conservative amount, tapping it on her cheeks and face as she spread it out in circles on the surface. And when she was finished, she pulled out her phone from her pocket and looked at herself, eyes raised as she waited for something to happen.
This is gonna...
And well, something did happen. She started screaming really loud, and her skin started sizzling and dripping off her face. Now, I'm not squeamish much, but being caught off guard like that, I backed up and away from the counter. "What the hell is this?" Melissa screamed as the skin on her face started dripping off her faster, like a melting candle. Meanwhile, I was behind the counter struggling to keep my food down. Luckily for me, I had skipped breakfast, so I just gagged a lot. "You asked for no more acne, dear," Creole hummed over her loud screams and the sizzling of her skin. "Now, you won't have to worry about that ever again." He hummed with a soft chuckle as he watched her squirm and scream some more. At this point, Melissa's face was mostly on the floor in a bloody mess. She clawed at what was left of her skin as it melted her down to her skull and sinew. Her hands weren't spared either, as they too started melting their skin off. It took less than 2 minutes for the girl called Melissa to have become nothing but a steaming pile of bones, blood, and other gross shit.
Isn't that great?
Floor.
Isn't that a great
"Travis,
story to
be a
tell your
good boy and
kids?
Clean up this mess, please," Creole said as he turned his attention to me. I was still hacking and looked up to him like he was insane. I just watched some girl die in front of me, and now he wanted me to get rid of her. Just a little bit crazy, don't you think? I started to stammer, holding my stomach and shivering some at what I'd just seen. But my gaze turned when he gripped me by the shoulder and stared into my eyes with his button eyes.
I don't work at King Creole's place. He sounds like an interesting character. I know, right? He's wild.
Put the pile of bones in a trash bag and toss it into the basement.
I gotta figure out how to draw a
He
hay
hung
bale,
to
too.
me, raising his finger quickly when I tried to remind him that I wasn't allowed in the basement. "I'll be down there, so don't worry about it," he hummed, patting me hard on the back and walking over to the door, unlocking it with a key he produced from his suit pocket and inserting it into the basement door. Opening it quickly, he closed it behind him. I could hear his muffled yelling and whatever was downstairs scurrying away from the door as his footsteps disappeared down into the unknown.
Into the
Looking over the pile of
unknown.
human bones and blood, I sighed hard and looked behind the counter. Putting on rubber gloves and getting out a mop, I went to work.
Oh, that's on a
collecting
different
all the
row.
bones
Okay.
by hand and putting them in a trash bag, and doing my best to hold my breath. I didn't know if he wanted the organs in there as well, so I just scooped them up quickly and shoved them into the bag. I was gagging hard, but I pushed it aside and did my best to mop up the leftover blood. I did a decent job for it being my first time and all. Finally, I grabbed the bag and went over to the basement door, looking at it and swallowing a lump in my throat before I opened the door and looked down into the pitch black hole. Looking at the bag, I tied it up as good as I could and chucked it down there, closing the door again and sighing hard as I kept a hand on it and looked down at the floor. A little shining piece of broken porcelain caught my attention. Reaching down, I grabbed it and looked at it. It was just a white piece, maybe from a vase or something. So I shoved it in my pocket and went back to my stool, pulling out my phone and shivering as I scrolled through it. King Creole returned after 30 minutes, slamming the door shut and locking it, mumbling something to himself as he took off his hat and dusted it. Looking over to me, his smile returned and he walked over, peering over the
Oh
counter
no.
to see my work. "Excellent work, Travis," he hummed, wrapping an arm around me and looking at me, like a proud father when his son
Well,
caught his
actually,
first
let's
fish.
see.
"Why don't you take the rest of the
Does
day
this work?
off?
Oh, it
Here,
does.
for all your trouble,"
Yes.
he hummed,
Yes.
rolling his fingers like he
It's
was
a nice
doing a
little art
card
secret.
trick and producing $200. Staring at that amount of money and then back at him,
Hi,
he could have asked me
Whisper.
to
What's
lick the
up?
dusty counter and I would have done it. Taking it from him, I nodded and thanked him. Getting everything I came with, my phone and nothing else, I unstuck the pin from the voodoo doll and left without another word said. Now look, I know what you're all thinking. I covered up some girl's death or helped get rid of her body. And you're right, I did. But in my own defense, I did get paid a lot to do it. And it seems like everyone thought she just ran away. No police ever came to the shop, and they never do whenever a wish goes bad. So don't start your preaching to me. Not like I'm the one telling people to make wishes without thinking them through. So, if you ever end up at this shop, think your wishes through, okay? Now, I need to get back to work. Customer just walked in. What would you do if you got held up at work, like at gunpoint, and some coked up junkie is screaming at you to give him all the money in the register? Hold your hands up and comply. Try and be a hero and fight him off with a bat or a gun hidden under the counter. I always thought I would just give the guy the cash register and hold my hands up while he left with it. That was until I got held up not once, but twice in the same week. It was the first time I got to work on time, looking around to make sure King Creole wasn't hiding behind some corner that I didn't even know existed in the shop. Satisfied that my boss wasn't going to scare me, I walked over to the counter and stabbed my needle into the counter doll, taking a seat on my stool and sighing as I started my shift, drumming my fingers up and down on the counter. Normally, I would see at
$200 for
most
covering up a
4 or
murder.
5
I would ask for
customers
$250
during the entire
minimum.
shift.
Just being a goober when it
Most
comes to
want
this new
a
project and
wish,
fixing my
much
laptop
to
to
my
work on it the
chagrin,
usual. Oh, nice.
and maybe 1 or 2 of them want a potion. That's a simple procedure.
That's my pumpkin
You ask
looking.
for a
I know it's not
potion, and I
perfect,
ring
but
you
you
up.
know, it's a start,
Easy as
right?
that. I don't have to clean anything, and I don't have to help discard a body. But unfortunately for me, not many people want a potion. They'd rather try and wish for something. So when a guy came in wearing a beanie and a hoodie, I was more than willing to bet that he was going to ask for a wish. I barely opened my mouth to talk to him when a gun was shoved in front of my face. By reflex almost, I put my hands up slowly. "Easy, man," I said in a squeaky, surprised voice. "Don't try and say you wouldn't react the same way." "Shut up. Is it just you in here?" the guy asked, his eyes darting everywhere in a paranoid state. He was obviously on something. He had to be to try and rob a place that looked abandoned 90% of the time.
Alright.
I think my
Looks like
boss
a
is
pumpkin?
here,
Oh, nice.
and that thing in the basement, but I'm
You know what
pretty sure he can't
sucks?
get
I gotta
out.
draw like 10
I
more.
motioned my head over to the shut basement
I don't
door,
gotta.
which of course this time was not banging or crying or screaming. The guy, obviously unamused, shoved the gun further in my face. "Get your boss out here before I blow your brains all over the walls,"
Ew!
he threatened, cocking the hammer back on his revolver. "Okay, just chill, man," I said, putting my hands up higher as I backed up and started making my way over to the boss man's office. Lucky the guy was so busy focused on me, because believe me when I say that the dolls on the wall behind him looked like they wanted to jump down and rip him to shreds. Making it to King Creole's office, I quickly knocked on it, looking back to the guy who was staring at the counter doll. I imagine he had the look on him that he gives when I'm slacking off on my phone. "Travis, what do you want?"
What do you want?
Creole's voice came from his office. The door opened.
Copy and
him
paste?
looking down
How,
at me,
fam?
then over to the guy holding
How do I
up
copy and
his
paste a pumpkin?
establishment. His smile lowered a bit, but it didn't falter. Instead, he nodded knowingly and stepped out, fixing his dark purple tie and walking over to the counter with me next to him. "Jesus," the robber gasped when he saw King Creole coming towards him. A pretty normal response when seeing my
That
boss
didn't
for
work.
the first time. The man didn't falter for too long, though, pointing the gun up at the lanky voodoo shop owner. "What can I do for you?" Creole asked with a hum, hands clasped together as he looked down at the robber. Not an ounce of concern
Oh,
in
it
that
did work.
chalky white face of his.
Wait, so
"Open
now
up
how
the
do I move
register in
like
the
just
safe,"
this?
the robber said quickly, looking back at the door, then back to us quickly, the gun firmly in his hands and a serious look on his face, despite his eyes darting between us. "Well, I don't have a safe, but if it's the register you want, Travis will be more
I
than
can't
willing
move
to
it.
open
I
it
just
for you.
duplicated it, but it won't let me
Right,
move
Travis, my
it.
boy?" he asked me, giving me a hard smack to my back and sending me stumbling forward. The robber nearly shot me on the spot as I did so, my hand still up, and I looked back to Creole like he was sending me to the slaughter. Well, if he wanted to get robbed, I
I
really
didn't care how to
couldn't
use that
stop him.
program. Yeah,
I
me
walked
either.
back behind the counter and opened up
It's
the
okay.
register.
One pumpkin's
And one
fine.
look
I'm
at
just
it
gonna make a bay
told me
hill,
that
but I
it
don't know
was
how to
way
do that.
more
Look it
filled
up.
than usual. I can say that for a fact, because when I opened it up, the thing shot some loose bills up into the air. My eyes were as wide as the robber's, who quickly pushed me aside and started filling up his hoodie and pants pockets with all the cash from the register. "Now, Kevin," King Creole's voice hummed in a tone that I knew meant trouble, the one he used when persuading someone into wishing for something. I started instinctively backing away from him as he kept up shoving bills into his pockets. He did look up, though, obviously confused as to how the voodoo man knew his name. "How the hell do you know my name?" the robber, who I guessed was indeed named Kevin, asked, pointing a gun at King Creole, who didn't flinch as he walked over to him.
Alright.
The robber was
So
obviously
there's
freaked out,
couple
the gun
kinds.
shaking in his hand.
I think I have an
"Didn't your
idea.
mama ever teach you that stealing is very, very bad?" Creole said, raising a gloved finger and shaking it at Kevin, who started shivering and backing up from the man. "And didn't anyone ever tell you not to play with guns?" he asked the man. Kevin looked to me, his eyes wide with fear as
I'm
he
gonna put
pointed the shaking
like
revolver
a mountain one
forward.
here and then like
A
a
loud
one.
crack went off in the shop. My own eyes were wide as my ears rang, seeing that Kevin had pulled the trigger on my boss. I looked over to King Creole, who staggered to a stop, his head jerked backward and the stitches holding his head on almost snapping off. "Oh, Kevin, Kevin. His voice still rang, causing both my and Kevin's jaw to hit the floor. Creole jerked his head back into place, only this time there was an obvious bullet hole in his forehead. "Looks like I'll have to teach you a lesson." He chuckled. Kevin then started backing up, dropping the gun to the floor and holding his hands up.
Too late,
I,
Kevin.
meanwhile, looked over at
It's
Creole,
too late,
completely
Kevin.
dumbfounded. I, at this point, had figured he wasn't really human, but surviving a headshot really kind of solidified that in my own head.
Too late,
I looked
Kevin.
over at the register and saw that it was still very much full of cash. A never-ending cash register. Another perk to working here, I guess. "Travis, do be a good boy and look away, please,"
Not look
King
away.
Creole asked me as he closed the distance to Kevin, grabbing the robber by the throat
Oh,
and lifting
no.
him up from the floor.
Oh, no.
"I don't want you to watch this part,"
Oh,
he said
no.
sweetly, like a mom talking to her son about something. I
Oh,
opened
no.
my mouth to ask what was going to happen,
Oh, no.
but I thought better, turning around and looking at the wall behind me. Kevin, meanwhile, screamed and begged for me to help him. Funny how that works. A couple of minutes ago, he was holding me up, and now he's screaming at the top of his lungs to help him. Though that didn't last too much longer, since his screaming turned into gurgles and hacking coughs. I did my best to ignore the increasingly wet and
Kevin.
nasty slaps and rips coming from behind me.
Kevin, no.
I'm gonna be honest, the fear of what he was doing to the robber was a million times scarier than the act of being robbed. "All done." The satisfied hum of my boss rang in my ringing ears. I turned and saw the big splatter of blood on the wall and floor where Kevin had been.
Oof.
Great. No doubt I would have to clean that up.
Oof.
"What did you do with him?" I asked the old voodoo king. He looked at me with those big black button eyes of his and looked to his arm, which he brought up and showed me. He was holding a controller for a marionette doll, except it was made of bones, small bones that almost looked like some kind of animals. Of course, those thoughts were dispelled when he lifted his arm up further and produced a small, bloody figure attached to the strings of the controller. I'm sure I don't need to spell out who the figure looked like. "I don't appreciate people threatening my employees." He sighed, dropping the bloody figure onto the table and making it dance around,
Not making it dance
making the counter
around.
messy with blood as he did so. I looked up at him, both thankful and pissed off, mostly because I figured I'd have to clean all this up. "Thank you, sir. Do you want me to—" I started, but was soon interrupted by him when he held his hand up and the little figure mimicked him. Gotta hand it to him. He's a great puppeteer. "Don't worry.
I'm not
about
confident about this
Travis."
Bay Hill.
He shrugged it off, chuckling as he picked up the figure and held it tightly clenched in his gloves, more blood leaking out of it and dripping onto the counter. "Just get rid of this for me, please?" he asked, tossing the gun at me. I fumbled with it, afraid that it was going to go off in my hands. I looked up at him, noticing that the bullet hole in his forehead had disappeared. I didn't ask about that, though. I simply nodded and went over to the front door and left, walking across the street to a dumpster that is near our shop.
He is a
in the
pretty
alley,
cool boss.
tossing it in there after I wiped it down against my pants just in case my fingerprints were in there. I quickly jogged back into the store, more than happy to see not a speck left where Kevin once was. That was the first time I was held up in this store. The second time came about 2 days later. I was working later
just
than
make it, like,
usual. My shift
feel like
is
that's too
usually from
much.
9 a.m. to 3 p.m. This time, I was working from 5 to 9. Not horrible, but we definitely get weirder people in the later hours. Weird people that are usually chill with King Creole and the odd person asking for a wish or potion. Well, This time,
Working
a fine
on
gentleman
nothing.
came
I'm
running
just
into
trying to
the
entertain
store and
y'all
hid behind a shelf that
since
covered
there's
him
no
from the view of the
animation.
front door. I watched as he squatted even lower when a car drove past,
Just making a bale
shining
of
a
hay.
light into the shop and going
Attempting to make a
along
bale
for
of
a
hay.
moment. The guy looked up for a minute and then over to me. "Hey, do you need anything, or are you just here to loiter?" I asked him. Look, I was tired, man, and I was like half an hour away from unpinning my needle from the doll. Mentally, I was checked out already, so when the guy pointed a gun at me, I actually rolled my eyes at him. Again, I thought, as I put my hands up. "I need a place to hide," the guy said quickly, looking back at the door and rushing over to me. "The cops are after me," he said again. And that's when I noticed the blood on his clothes. I sighed and looked over to King Creole's office, hoping he could handle this. Of course, when I turned back around and saw him right behind this guy, I nearly shat myself.
Oof.
"What have we here?" he asked, putting his hand onto the other man's shoulder and flipping him around to face him. The man gasped and was quickly disarmed. "Need a place to hide, son." "What?" he said in confusion, but at the mention of hiding, he quickly pulled out a switchblade, pointing it up at Creole. "Where? I need it quick, man," he said, looking behind Creole to see if the cops were making another round. "Why, right this way, sonny," my boss said with a happy tone, pulling the nameless man along and towards the basement. Now, seeing that really sent my stomach down into a pit. At this point, I had gotten used to the basement creature, but seeing some unsuspecting person getting led there, I felt bad for the guy. "Faster, you freak! They could be here any minute,"
Wow.
the man said, flinching
Stupid.
at any little creak of the shop. Creole took his sweet time, pulling out the key and opening the basement, opening it up and stepping aside like a grand unveiling. "All yours," he hummed, watching with a wide smile as the man rushed into the dark basement, closing the door behind him and locking it. "And that's that," he hummed, looking back to me with that same smile and walking over to me. What is down there, sir?" I asked him, pointing at the basement door. Creole looked me dead in my eyes. I could tell he wasn't messing around, just by the tone of his voice. "None of your business, Travis,"
Oh no.
he said in almost an animal-like snarl.
None of your
I swallowed
business,
the lump
Tremens.
in my throat and backed up a bit, nodding up at him,
Feeding
and
basement
clenching
people.
hard when the
Feeding the
door
basement
began
people.
to
Yeah.
be banged on. "Let me out! There's something down here!" the man screamed, banging harder and harder on the door. Of course, those bangs soon turned into loud screams as I assume whatever lived in the basement caught up with him. King Creole looked back at the basement door and waited for it to stop banging. Soon enough it did, and we heard the sounds of something being dragged down the stairs.
Oh no.
I looked at him then. A look of anger was on his pale face. The first time I'd ever seen him like that. "That whore gets what she deserved," he mumbled, low enough to where I assume he thought I couldn't hear. But here I did. I didn't say anything, wiping up the counter and unpinning my needle from the doll. "Good night, sir," I said as I took off my name tag and shoved it into my pocket. My words shook him from his angry spat, and he turned on his heels to look at me, a smile on his face once again. "Good night, Travis, my boy,"
My boy?
he hummed, turning and walking off back to his office. I nodded and turned to leave myself. I stopped at the door, though,
Alright,
turning
so
back and looking at the basement door.
we got a
I
pumpkin.
looked back over towards King Creole's office,
We got
and
a
once I was sure he
haystack.
was in there, I made my way back over to
We
the
got
door.
bales of hay.
I looked at it, noticing the blood coming from underneath the
Yeah.
crack of the door. I knelt and
What
tried
else
to peer
spooky?
through the keyhole. I didn't see anything at first, just the
that's
usual
enough
blackness of a
spooky. We can work on
basement.
the sky
I
now.
sighed and stood to leave
And then add the
until I
panda.
heard a soft thud come from the door. I turned and raised a brow to that. Leaning down again, I put my eye to the keyhole. This time, I was greeted by a green, shiny, cracked eye. Flinching hard, I backed up and quickly made my way out of the shop, shaking my head quickly and just getting out of there. I don't know what King Creole has down there, and I don't really want to know
So let's
either,
draw the moon
even if
first.
whatever it is keeps begging me to let it out. So, by this point, I'm pretty sure you guys have a pretty good grasp on what King Creole is like as a boss. He's creepy and a murderer by most definition of the law, right? I mean, the button eyes
I
and
guess we
sewn
put
up mouth should have been a dead giveaway to that.
the moon in the middle?
Well, he has ways of surprising you. Like some pointed out, he defended me during the robbery and the runaway convict situation. That alone sort of tipped the scales to him being pretty alright. Well, something happened a few days ago that really changed my perspective on him. It was a lazy Saturday. I was leaning back on my newly upgraded rocking chair. That's right, folks, no more crappy tool. Old buddy boy Travis has a rocking chair.
Buddy boy Travis.
And I was rocking on the chair, enjoying how good it felt to have back support, when the rusty doorbell rang. I looked over at the door and saw nobody there. Odd, but not out of the ordinary in this place. Figured it was some ghost or something. Until I heard the sounds of tiny straining, and a little hand came up from the other side of the counter. I raised my brow at that, and quickly looked to the wall of voodoo dolls. Had one escaped again, I thought to myself. But my train of thought was derailed when a childlike voice pulled my attention back over.
I want a rocking chair, I know, right?
The voice asked, innocent and just a little shy. I stood up from my rocking chair and looked over the counter to see a little girl standing there by herself. She looked to be about in second or even first grade. Her little hands quickly went behind her back when she looked up at me. Hello, little girl. Are you lost? I asked her, looking around the shop for any sign of a parental figure. Didn't take me too long, considering how small this place is. I want a wish, she said softly, looking up at me and giving a soft pout. The kind a kid gives when they expect the answer to be no, but they still want to shoot their shot. Let me get my boss, okay? I said to her. I wasn't exactly trained to handle children, much less one looking to ask for a wish, and having seen my fair share of wishes in this place, I almost wanted to talk her out of it. But a job is a job. Turning to go to Creole's office, I was surprised to see him already leaving it. Ah, Travis, my boy, he said with a hum, pulling on his suit to straighten it out and patting some dust off of it. I need you to watch the shop while he began to say, but his button eyes quickly turned to see the little girl standing at the counter, who was too busy looking up at the wall of voodoo dolls to notice us. Well, I'll be, he said in a bewildered voice. Yeah, she came in here asking for a wish. I was just about to come and get you, I explained, looking back over to the mystery girl. She was busy looking wide-eyed at all the dolls available. It was like she'd never seen a toy before. A wish, huh? He asked with a hum, walking over to the little girl and clearing his throat. Oh, little Miss Olivia, he asked, bending down to his knees to get on her level. The little girl turned around, and to my surprise, didn't flinch at all at King Creole's appearance. In fact, she had stars in her eyes when she saw him. Are you a wish man?
A wish man?
And excitedly. Why, I do believe I am, he responded after a chuckle and a smile. This smile was different than the one he usually wore. His normal smile always gave off an air of creepy judgment, like someone knowing the person they were talking to was inferior, but his smile this time seemed genuine. "Can you grant me a wish?" the girl named Olivia asked
I
quietly,
know, Livy's really
looking up
awesome.
to the voodoo man with all the passion a girl at her age could have. Hell, I wanted to grant her a wish just from that. "I'm afraid you're too young, darling. I can't in good conscience grant you a wish," Creole said sadly, taking off his hat as if in silent apology. You could see Olivia's heartbreak clear on her face. She drooped like a dying flower immediately, her arms behind her back coming to the surface. And that's when I noticed all the bruises on them. Creole saw them as well. His attention turned to it, and he took the girl by the arm, gently lifting her tiny, pale, and bruised arm up and looking at her. "Who did this to you?" he asked softly. Olivia looked like she was holding back the floodgates, and they finally broke as she started crying and hiccuping, using her free arm to wipe her face as she cried. But she managed to blurt out an answer to Creole. "My mommy." As if on cue, the front door slammed open, nearly breaking a shelf near it as a woman came into the shop. I could tell she was Olivia's mother by the resemblance of her to her crying daughter. "Olivia, what in the hell are you doing in this place?" she demanded to know, coming over with a look of rage on her face. Wow. Calm down there, darling. Little Miss Olivia was simply asking for a wish, was all,"
I'll fix
Creole
it, but I'm just
said,
gonna get this part done
springing
on
up
all
and
of them
quickly
first.
pushing Olivia behind him. I acted as well, motioning for the girl to come behind the counter. She reacted accordingly, coming over to me and hugging my pants leg. "She shouldn't have left where I told her to stay." The woman spat in my boss's face.
Not
I could
spat!
smell the alcohol on her from
Oh
here.
no, not the
Figures.
alcohol.
"I'm not paying for whatever she asked for. Olivia, get your ass over here and get in the car," she screamed in my direction. I reached a hand down and patted the girl's head as she shivered violently against me. "I assure you, ma'am, you don't have to pay for anything," Creole hummed, holding his hands up defensively against the woman's gabs and accusations. "Why, all she asked for was a doll, and I'm mighty inclined to get her one," he hummed, fixing his tie as he walked past the angry mother. He walked over to the wall of voodoo dolls and hummed as he looked up at the wall, pointing his finger out as if to try and find the right one, and snapping when he found it. Reaching out, he took the correct doll and brushed it off, blowing on it and sending the dust in the mother's face. She began coughing.
That's
I
rude.
smiled at that,
He did that on
seeing
purpose.
my boss stand up for this poor girl. "Miss Olivia?" he asked her as he walked over and past the sputtering mother. He once again got down on her level and revealed the doll to her. It was a small one, about the size of my forearm. It was dressed in a black Victorian gown and had the hair to match, along with the button eyes of all the dolls we had in the store. Olivia, pulling herself away from my leg, looked up at the doll with awe, sniffling as she held both her bruised arms out. King Creole carefully gave her the doll and smiled as she looked at it, brushing the doll's hair and quickly giving it a hug.
Oh,
"Thank you," she said softly, clinging to the item as she walked away from the counter and to her mother. "That thing better not have any fleas,"
that's
she hissed,
rude.
turning and grabbing Olivia's little arm and yanking her along. Olivia gave one last forlorn look as she was dragged away, the sad, rusty bell jingling as they both left. I looked over to my boss, who was clearly as upset as I was. That scene was more difficult for me than all the bad wishes I've ever seen working here, because of how hopeless it all seemed. As if reading my mind, Creole put his hand on my
snap.
shoulder and forced my gaze to look into his button eyes. "She'll be fine, son. I assure you of that," he said, nodding to me and tussling my hair, sighing as he let me go and started back to his office, the thing in the door banging as he walked past it, causing him to freeze in place. He looked to the door with a clenched fist and smashed it against it. "Shut up! You are never leaving that place!" he screamed at the door, his mouth wide as he gritted his teeth. A few of the stitches ripped, causing him to cover his mouth and walk over to his office, slamming the door with a loud slam, leaving me alone with the uneasy feeling
that's kind of
being
cloudy.
all
It's a lot,
alone in the
though.
shop.
It's a lot of cloud. I might have
was hard to
to.
get
Let's
through.
see.
All I could think about was poor Olivia and her mother. I sighed and sat back in my rocking chair. Not much I could do. I didn't know her last name, so I couldn't
The
report her
opacity
to
level
CPS.
on this,
So
I
I
can probably
resigned
change. I don't know
myself to
how to do
listen to
it.
King Creole, who has never steered me wrong. Only 2 other customers came in that day, and all they wanted was a wart removal potion and a heart attack potion. Don't ask.
Oh, there it is.
As I unpinned my pin from the doll on the counter, I looked over
Oh,
to
it does the
Creel's
whole
office.
thing. I don't want the whole
Walking
thing to
over to
change.
it, I knocked 3 times.
I just want the
Not hearing
opacity
anything
on
from
this
inside,
one.
I opened the door and poked my head in, seeing Creole at his desk sewing a doll at his office, obviously lost in whatever thoughts were dancing around in that head of his. "Sir, I'm
There
gonna
we
head
go.
home," I said, breaking his concentration
Nope, that's
as
still
he
everything.
lifted his head to
What
look
the
up at me.
nani? How do I
He
do
looked
just
confused
one?
for a second before looking over to the clock on his wall and nodding, seemingly
Oh, it is just
realizing what
one.
the
I just
time
happened to
was.
draw the clouds on the same one as
Right.
this.
"Yes. See you tomorrow,
No,
Travis,"
I drew the
he
cloud. I
said
didn't draw
like
the
a
clouds on its
robot.
own layer.
He turned back to the doll he
Dang.
was sewing and said nothing more to me. I nodded and turned to leave, letting the door to his office close
Opacity
behind me.
doesn't fix it though. It just makes
Walking
it
away from
darker.
his office,
It's
I
not what I
stopped at
want.
the basement
I
door.
want it to be like
Reaching
fadier,
in
but I
my
also know how to
pocket
do
and
that,
pulling
so
out
it's
that
okay.
single shard of porcelain I'd kept all this time. I rubbed my finger over it and looked to the door. "Please, let me out."
No.
The voice of a woman came from behind the door. No pounding this time, just a soft
crap.
and desperate voice of a woman. She had a southern accent, but it sounded far away, like if she was
like
talking to me from a hallway. I didn't answer.
Sort
All
of.
I did was place the shard of porcelain at the foot of the door and slowly push it
Alright,
underneath the
so now I gotta
crack.
know what to do with that.
Turning and leaving for the day, I got home and hugged my mom, just to thank whatever being is out there for giving me loving parents. The next day, I still had Olivia in my mind, but I mostly resigned myself to just get through another day of work. Walking into the shop, I saw King Creole standing at the counter, an amused look
Is
on
the
his
chat
pale
still
face.
popping up on stream?
His smile only grew as I
Oof,
got
it's still on
closer.
erase. Yikes.
"Good morning, sir," I said. The look he gave me caused a sharp chill to go up my spine. "Travis, my boy, did you try sneaking this underneath the door?"
Uh-oh.
he asked as sweetly as honey, lifting up the shard of porcelain I had tried to sneak under the door.
Uh-oh.
I audibly swallowed and nodded. I was just trying to... I don't know, I thought... I stammered,
it is? I
trying
bet.
to give him the reasoning behind my apparent crime. Travis, he said, walking out from behind the counter and walking close to me. He grabbed me by the collar and pulled me close to him, his smile turning into a scowl that turned my blood into ice. "Don't ever give her anything. Am I understood?" he growled, his yellow teeth sharpening as he spoke. I quickly nodded, shivering as hard as a human could. Yes, sir, I promise. I stuttered out, breathing hard once he released me, his smile returning and his teeth going back to normal. Wonderful. Now you better clock in. I'm expecting a very fine appointment today.
Oh
He
no.
hummed,
Yeah,
spinning
he
around
definitely
on
got
his
caught.
heels and walking to his office,
He definitely
letting
got
the
caught.
door close behind him. Huffing hard, I walked to my rocking chair and sat down myself, stabbing the doll in the head and rubbing my face hard. Last time I would ever try to even look at that basement door if that's how he reacted to my just returning something to it.
Exactly.
Pulling my phone out, I used it to get my mind off what had just happened. Maybe an hour or two into my shift, my phone usage was interrupted by the front door flying open. The rusty bell nearly flew off from its place as the door swung open and shut afterward. I looked up and dropped my phone when I saw it was Olivia's mom, although she looked a little paler. Her skin looked like Creole skin. "What the hell did you give to her?" she shouted as she stumbled to the counter, hacking and coughing violently. She collapsed onto her knees just near me, and she looked up, sending me flying back farther from my chair. She had one eye dangling from its socket,
Oh no.
and the other one looked like it was made of milk chocolate and starting to melt. She clawed her nails into the counter and pulled herself up, feeling around and grabbing my arm, pulling me close to her. I don't know, man. I just work here.
I don't know,
Was
man.
all
I just
could
work
offer
it.
the woman, trying to get away from her as her one eye fell out with a gross-sounding plop. She recoiled and stumbled backward, gasping and coughing, white puffy stuff coming out of her mouth and falling to the floor.
Ew.
I knew what it was instantly. It was doll stuffing.
Ew.
"Goodness, you're early." Creole's cheery voice came. I turned to see he was standing in his office door. He strode his way over to the woman and grabbed her by the hair, pulling it upward so he could look into her eye sockets. "Now, dear, we can't have you losing your stuffing." He chuckled, producing some thread and a needle. "What the hell did you do to me?" she shouted, shoving him away and trying to stumble away herself, only for her leg to buckle underneath her like an accordion. Humans aren't meant to bend that way, if you didn't know. "Dear me, you're changing much faster than I thought you would." Creole chuckled, grabbing the woman again and yanking her up. I was in shock at all this. By this point, the woman's skin looked like one of the dolls we sell. That's when it clicked for me. She was definitely turning into a doll. "Sir?" I spoke up, flinching when Creole slammed the woman onto my counter and started
Jesus.
sewing her mouth shut,
Jesus.
despite the woman's thrashing and
Jesus.
quickly impinging appendages.
Jesus.
He looked over to me with a quizzical look and smiled. "Be a good boy and hold her down, Travis,"
Oh no.
he said, continuing to sew her mouth up as he spoke. I looked to her and swallowed as I walked forward and quickly gripped her arms, already feeling that there was not an ounce of bone left in them. All I could feel was doll stuffing. I closed my eyes as I held her down. I'm not proud of this moment. When he was finished and finally allowed me to let go, King Creole gave her the finishing touches, sewing
Oh, it's all on the
buttons into her
same one,
empty
so it
eye
doesn't matter.
sockets
Oh.
and smiling as he wiped his
Yikes.
gloved hands clean. "Her present is all done. Just gotta wait for her to shrink." He chuckled, looking at me with an excited smile. I gave him a confused look, my eyes wandering down to the body. It was dead still, and looking very much like she belonged in the morgue. The more I looked, though, the more I realized that she was shrinking, inch by inch. Well, at least I know where some of the voodoo dolls come from now. I was left in charge of the doll while I waited for this mystery guest of his. I already had an inkling who it was for, but with King Creole, you never know what to expect. I sat and watched as this fully grown woman shrunk down to the size of a child, then a toddler, then to the size of my forearm, and she was a doll, through and through. I lifted her up and looked at her, waggled her around, and finally left her on the counter. When the door opened again, the first thing I saw was a woman in a Victorian-style dress coming close to me. She looked at me with a warm and motherly smile. "Good day, shopkeep. I do believe my daughter would like to speak with you," she said. I looked at her, my jaw hitting the floor. She was the doll that King Creole had given Olivia. As if to reinforce this point, a tiny hand came up to pull on the big black dress. The woman looked down and smiled,
Oh my, that's
leaning
right.
down
Oh,
and
my hand's
lifting up
going
the
numb.
thing the tiny arm was attached to. "Where's Mr. King Creole?" Olivia asked with her big old happy eyes. I
Big
looked at
old
her,
happy
and then
eyes.
at this woman who just yesterday had been a doll. Looking back at Olivia, I opened my mouth to say something, but I was quickly cut off by Creole's office door opening and the voodoo man smiling so much I thought he'd
Oh,
bust
she
a
got a doll
stitch.
mom and her mom doll. So
"My
good. That's what I'm
darling
saying, trolls.
Olivia,
I said,
how are
should I
you?"
tell you, this one's really
He
good,
asked
even
this
though it
like
doesn't have
Olivia was a
animation.
friend he hadn't seen in forever. At his voice, Olivia smiled as wide as him, and the woman put her down, letting her run up to my boss and give his legs a hug. "Thank you so much for my new mommy," she said, nuzzling her face into him. He chuckled and knelt down a bit, patting her head and motioning me to come over. I took the doll off the counter and walked over, getting on my knees with an old man grunt and handing the doll
Not an
to
old man
Olivia.
grunt.
She gasped and happily accepted it, wrapping her little arms around it and thanking Creole 1,000,000 times. When all was said and done, Olivia said her goodbyes, and her new mother took her by the hand and led her out the door. This new mother turning around and waving goodbye to us and over to the voodoo dolls, who all waved back. "I do love happy endings," Creole sighed, taking his hat off and rubbing his messy black hair, turning to me and raising a brow to my obvious uncomfortableness over the whole situation. "Don't worry, son. She's in the best possible hands," he said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Sir, how come he didn't hurt her?" I asked, going back to all the times he'd caused horrible things to happen to anyone seemingly needing his help. He looked at me like I'd spoken Chinese at him. "Son, my mama always said, help those that truly need it. Can you stand there and tell me
No.
she didn't need our
Sorry,
help?"
I keep messing up.
he asked, patting my shoulder and heading over to his office, leaving me with that train of thought for the rest of the day as I washed away all the blood left over from the old mother. King Creole is a strange man. He went from wanting to kill me for going near the basement door to hugging a child that he'd saved from an abusive mother. I still deal with the back and forth of his personality. I don't think I'll ever understand him, and I don't ever expect to. All I want to know is, what is in the basement that causes him so
Stop!
much
Sorry, there's a fly,
rage?
like, abusing me right now.
You know, the more I work here at old King Creole's half-price voodoo shop, the more I start to question how the hell I never noticed it before. Now, I'm ready to admit I'm no Einstein when it comes to this town. Sure, I've lived here my whole life, but even then I'm still discovering new places. I didn't even know we had a Denny's near us until last week. But the fact that so many of our customers are high school kids makes me wonder how come I've never heard of this place before. Then I look back at my track record of socializing in school and remember, oh yeah, that's why I never learned of this place. I think the reason I have to clean up so many messes here is that a majority of our customers are indeed stupid high school kids. They barge in here thinking they've got a way around King Creole's game. And every single time, I'm the poor idiot that has to clean up their stupid mess. It's to the point where anytime I see a teenager come into the shop, I instinctively reach behind the counter for some rubber gloves. Because I know I'll have to wipe what's left of them off the floor and walls.
It's jacked up.
I think the worst case of this was when a group of 4 kids walked in. They were seniors, and I'm pretty sure they were about to graduate. They came into the shop while I was busy actually getting to stock something for once. We just had someone come in and buy a decent amount of voodoo dolls, so I was finally allowed to stock them. Using my old stool, I managed to put them all in place.
Followed by abuse. Yeah, I don't know what it's attracted to, because
it was 3 girls and a guy who had his arm around the blonde girl. A couple, I assumed. The other 2 girls seemed to have just tagged along for this ill-fated journey to my place of employment. The guy looked over to me and shot me that head movement all us guys make to each other. You know the one. "Hey guys," I said, getting off my stool and heading to the counter, sitting on my rocking chair and making sure all my cleaning supplies were in view. "What can I do you for?" I asked, realizing I was picking up some of Creole's fancy southern talk. "We heard there were wishes here, and since we're about to graduate, we figure why not try them out?" the guy said, letting his girlfriend go and going over to the shelf of voodoo dolls, getting in real close and looking at them all. The girls, meanwhile, didn't wander too far from him, since they were no doubt afraid of all the cobwebs
immediately
around.
Just from doing that.
Fair enough. "Yup. Do y'all want one?" I asked, dreading the answer I expected. The guy and his girlfriend nodded, while only one of the other girls, a black-haired girl in a blouse, responded as well with a nod.
Alright.
The last girl in her
make
hoodie,
these
though,
clouds less thick. They're kind of thick, you know.
Figured she got dragged here. "Travis, my dear boy, seems you've brought in quite the bit of customers." Creole hummed, walking over to me from seemingly nowhere. He does that a lot, and smiling at the group of students, all of whom instantly backed up a couple of feet in shock at my boss's appearance. "Wow, freaky costume, man," the guy said, chuckling, trying to keep up a brave face in front of his girl, but I could tell he was seconds from pissing himself. All the girls had the same expression. "What can I do for you, Jacob?" the boss man asked, looking at me. I was wondering why until I realized my rocking chair was taking up space he needed to get to the counter. So I just easily backed up a bit and let him do his thing. I pulled out my phone for a second, which had a dead battery, and instead I decided to watch the inevitable horror that was about to come my way. "Man, you're freaky as hell," Jacob chuckled nervously, clearing his throat and coming forward with as much moxie as he could muster. "Okay, I wish to get into my dream college. Full ride, so I don't have to pay for anything," he declared, confidently crossing his arms at King Creole. Had to hand it to him. That was a pretty airtight wish. I couldn't think of really any way for Creole to mess with that wish. Well, until his girlfriend spoke up. "What the hell, Jacob?" the girlfriend shouted, coming over to Jacob and pounding him with her fist over and over again. "You're trying to find a way to leave me, aren't you?"
Oh my gosh, she
so shouted,
annoying.
Grabbing him and thrashing him around. She seemed the clingy type. "No, you crazy bitch, I'm trying to secure my..."
Yo, he just called her.
He shouted,
oh shit,
shoving her away and rolling his eyes as if this had been an ongoing issue. Me and Creole looked at each other and just shrugged. Wasn't our business to give these two couples therapy.
Alright, let's see how that looks.
Pushed past her boyfriend and up to the counter, slamming her fist down on the dusty
That looks so
countertop
scary for
and
no
staring
reason.
up with wide eyes to King Creole. "I wish that Jacob will never leave my side," she shouted,
She's so
causing
obsessed.
Jacob to come over and grab her, pulling her away from us. Well, the king began, bringing a hand up and starting to rub his chin. My mama taught me that ladies should go first.
There it
He
is.
smiled, shrugging and snapping his fingers, causing Jacob to stop in his tracks as he stopped thrashing around with his girlfriend. He looked at her with a new look in his eyes and started to kiss her. Now that's more like it, she giggled, wrapping her arms around him and making out in the shop. I rolled my eyes at this. Yes, I am horribly single, leave me alone.
I'm horribly single,
Although
leave me
what
alone.
happened next
Yeah, I'll
kinda
just
helps
darken
me
all the
feel
clouds like
better about
that,
being single.
I think.
She suddenly shouted in pain, trying to shove him off her. It was for good reason, since he had gotten a thread and needle and was starting to stick it into both of their skins. I need to be closer to you, he shouted in a crazed tone, starting to pick up speed as she screamed louder, trying to get away from him. Well, that went about as well as I expected it to go. He managed to pin her to the floor as he started to sew the two of them together.
Yikes.
The two other girls were screaming and cowering together as they watched the scene. Since Jacob appears to be preoccupied, Creole said with a chuckle, turning his attention to the two remaining girls. Would you ladies like to try your luck? He said with a smile, his fingers drumming on the counter as he waited. The black-haired girl quickly looked at the hoodie girl and shoved her away, backing up from everything and looking back at the door. I wish that I could live the rest of my life never seeing you again, she shouted, backing up and getting to the door. Creole shrugged and nodded to her. If that's what you wish for, he said, looking back at her and motioning for her to shoo with his hands. The girl nodded and turned, opening the door and running out at full speed. Shame. She didn't see the car that hit her seconds afterwards.
Jesus Christ!
I flinched at just how sudden it happened. Like she was out of the shop and dead in a good 10 seconds.
Jeez.
The last girl remaining was screaming her head off as she saw the girl hit by the car. And let's just say that Jacob and his girlfriend were closer than they were ever going to be. He and she were sewn together nice and tight, and bleeding everywhere. Please don't kill me, the girl mumbled, collapsing to the floor and shivering, shaking her head and pulling her hoodie down, revealing some long red hair. Looking over at her, I did feel pretty bad. She seemed like the one who had been dragged here unwillingly by her friends. Is that a wish, darling? My boss asked, stepping away from the counter and over to the sewn-up bodies wriggling on the floor. She answered, with a fast shake of her head. Then what is your wish? He asked, poking at the sewn-together couple with his finger.
Not poking
showing
them.
Some amusement from it. I don't want anything, she mumbled, curling up into the fetal position, shaking violently, and looking at me like I was going to come in and save her. Well, I get paid by this man, so I can't really offer much help. Shame. If that's the case, then please leave my shop. I don't take kindly to loiterers, he said, the front door swinging open. The girl looked up quickly, and then to the two of us, cautiously standing up and walking out of the shop, making sure to keep on the sidewalk as she started running away. Want me to clean up, sir? I asked Creole after an awkward silence. Looking over to me, he smiled and chuckled. If you wouldn't mind, son, he answered, looking at the sewn couple and then over to the basement door. I could tell from his face he was trying to figure out a way of getting them down there. I, meanwhile, was already getting the mop ready. Do you need help moving them? I asked him as I sat the bucket down and started filling it with bleach and soap. A decent enough way to hide the blood, but if the cops ever shine that stuff that shows hidden blood splatters, this place would look like a cheap motel room.
Oh no.
I might, he said, looking back over to the basement with a sneer. All right, help me get them to the door and leave them there. I'll head down there, and you can just roll them down it when I say it's all right. He nodded at me. Not having much of a choice since I offered to help, I helped him pick them up and carry them close to the door, the girl gurgling something incoherent at me,
Ew.
since hers and Jacob's mouths had been sewn together.
Ew.
I assume it was a plea for help. Once they were down at the foot of the door, Creole unlocked it and opened it. I peeked from behind his shoulder to see if I could get a look, but nothing but blackness stared back at me. All right. Looks like we can just kick them down there, Creole hummed, placing his dress shoe on the wriggling mass and shoving it down the stairs. The wet smacking and rolling.
Not the
were
wet
heard for a good
smacking.
solid 30 seconds. We waited, the door still open. Then we heard rapid crawling coming towards us. Before I could see the mysterious basement creature, Creole slammed the door closed and locked it tight. Well, I said after a decent amount of silence, I'll start cleaning, I said, backing away from Creole and heading back to my mop and bucket, starting to wipe away all the evidence of our latest crime. I looked back at the basement, and King Creole was still standing there. He was looking at the basement with his usual anger before wordlessly just walking back over to his office. I let him go, continuing to do the part of the job I hated most. While I was busy mopping, contemplating if I really should have gone into college, the door opened up, and I heard the familiar words of, "Hands in the air!" I raised my hands up quickly, my mop hitting the floor, and I turned to look at who was holding me up this time. Turned out, it was a cop. Shit. My arm straightened up quicker when I saw it was a cop this time, and not some idiot trying to rob us. Those thoughts of college were really starting to seem much more appealing. Turn around and step away from the mop and bucket. He
I'm gonna make one more cloud
I
dark.
did as I was told.
Then I'm gonna draw a
Heading over to the
panda
back
on there
wall.
somehow.
The cop
some way.
closed the distance and slammed me against the wall, slapping some cuffs on me and throwing me to the ground. He put his
I'll
gun
do the
in
knee
my back.
first, but
"Where's your boss?" he asked me, grabbing my head up so I could answer him. Office. Over there." I motioned towards his office. With that, the officer let my head go, which slammed down into the wooden floor, giving me a good-sized bruise on my forehead. I rolled over to see what was going to happen. This was the first time I'd ever had a run-in with the cops in this place. "You, in there, come out with your hands up," the officer shouted, gun trained on the door and waiting for anyone to comply with that order. I, meanwhile, strained to try and see what was going to happen, when suddenly my arms went limp and I was free from the cuffs. Pulling my hands out, I looked down to see the voodoo doll template, holding them. Turns out that thing doesn't hate me so much after all. Opening the door, Creole stared at the gun in his face and then over to the officer, his stitched mouth in a smile as he looked at the man. "Rookie. Your sergeant should have told you. You're not allowed in here." He sighed, looking past him to look at me on the floor. "And assaulting my employee. Shame on you." The voodoo man sighed, suddenly getting grabbed by the officer and tossed onto the floor quickly. "Keep your mouth shut. What did you do with the body?" he shouted, putting his foot on Creole's back. I felt afraid for the officer. Handling King Creole like that, in his own shop, would not end well. And end well, it did not. The second his foot was put on King Creole's back, every single voodoo doll on the wall came to life, staring at the officer and jumping off their places on the wall, hissing and screeching at him.
YouTube
as
is
they
working
all
again. I'm
rushed
back on
towards him.
this.
The officer looked at the sound of the noise and let out a shout as he tried shooting them.
Not
He
tried
got 2
shooting
shots
them.
off before they swarmed him. The best way I can describe what they did to him was piranhas eating a cow in the Amazon. They swarmed over him, ripping chunks of flesh off his body. I never can stand rude idiots, Creole hissed, angrily standing up and dusting himself off, walking over the rapidly disintegrating cop body and coming over to me. He offered me a hand and pulled me back up.
This fly is so aggressive, bro. It's like
He
all up
sighed,
in my face.
dusting me off. His attention then turned towards the squad
Like
car
literally
waiting
trying to
outside,
kiss
his
me.
button eyes staring at the car as he made
What the
his
heck
way
does this
over
fly
to the
want,
door.
bro?
Stepping outside
Like
the
it's trying to
shop,
fly into my
for
mouth.
the first time since I started working here. I looked over at what was left of the officer, a bloody uniform, and nothing else. In the split second I wasn't paying attention, all the voodoo dolls had returned to the wall and now had some accessories with them. Some bones and skin pieces. My little template friend was back on the counter, still giving me the stink eye for probably not cleaning up. I was going to until a girl's scream caught my attention. Creole was dragging that redhead back into the shop. She was trying with all her might to keep from being dragged away, her nails clawing at the wooden floor and spreading blood everywhere once her nails had been broken and destroyed. She cried and begged not to be hurt as she was dragged.
He's an idiot. She went to the cops, bro. He's gonna kill you.
This will show you not to misplace my good graces, Creole shouted, grabbing her by the hair when she caught the side of the counter and gripped it with all her might. He dragged her away by her hair and got to the basement door, opening it and dragging the redhead down into the depths. Creole didn't need to tell me to shut the door behind him. I went back to cleaning the bloody mess that was left behind, stuffing the officer's uniform into a trash bag and setting that aside as I mopped up every piece of blood I could see. I've gotten surprisingly good at this. Something about that girl's demise, though, didn't sit right with me. Out of everything he's done to people, hers was the one that rubbed me the wrong way the most.
Didn't bother
Not
me,
like
no.
I can do anything about it. Cops are clearly out of the question. Looking over to the basement door, I sighed as I sat back in my rocking chair when all the cleaning was done, my eyes closing in exhaustion. I didn't get much time to rest, for Creole returned after nearly an hour and a half, blood on his suit and pale face. I swallowed hard as he came over to me, staring at me with those blood-spattered button eyes. Travis, my boy, you've been so helpful these past few months that I think a raise is in order. He smiled, his yellow teeth back to being sharp fangs. How about 30 an hour?
Heck yeah.
Tilting his head at me.
30 an hour sounds good to me,
With
boss.
a bewildered look, quickly nodding without thinking. He smiled.
You don't want him to
rustled
quit.
my messy brown hair and pulled out my pay for the week. Take tomorrow off, he ordered when I took my pay. I looked up at him and nodded quickly. No way in hell I was going to question him. Packing up, I unstuck my pen and took the officer's uniform and the trash bag and threw it away. I made my way home and sighed hard, rubbing my face as I thought about that poor girl being dragged into whatever hell awaited her down in that basement. Ever since the redhead incident, I was wary of going back to work. I've never really cared about the people who get what they asked for whenever they don't think a wish through. But she wasn't there for a wish. She didn't want anything. She was just there. Yeah, she brought a cop to the shop, but if I was her, I'd do the same thing. Whatever happened to her down in the basement, she didn't deserve it. My day off was spent mostly in my room, sulking. just wrapped up in blankets and contemplating the many horrible things I had done for King Creole when my mom came in and knocked on my door. Travis, a couple of police officers are here looking for you. What the hell did you do?
Not what did
She
you
asked
do,
in a
immediately
confused
being
and
the
scared
question.
tone at the same time. As far as I know, she thinks I'm selling crack for all the money that I'm getting.
Oof.
I swallowed as I tossed my blankets away and made my way past her and down to the lobby of our house. 2 officers were standing there and looking at me. Travis, can we please talk to you outside? The older man said, brushing his graying hair back and placing his hat back on. I nodded wordlessly and looked back at my parents who were staring at me from the kitchen as I was led outside into the cold autumn afternoon. I put my hands in my hoodie pocket and looked up at the officers, my face betraying that I was nervous as hell. Is this about King Creole? I asked after a prolonged silence. My eyes widened when the officers nodded. They looked around quickly before the older one took his hat off again and looked me dead in the eyes. Tell him that we're sorry for the trouble that one of the rookies caused him. We didn't have time to radio him and tell him to wait for backup, the man said in a quick, nervous tone. My jaw fell to the floor at just how desperately this cop was apologizing to me. I can tell him tomorrow when I go back to work, I offered the man, who breathed a long, hard sigh of relief and nodded quickly, taking a notepad out and a pencil. Tell him the agreement with the department still stands and that we're terribly sorry about what happened, he said, scribbling something on his notepad and ripping it out. Handing it to me, I looked down at the note.
Okay, I love you. I gotta get project started. Have fun. Project. Oh, Lord.
I guess in case
Alright.
King Creole didn't believe me.
Spirit, thanks for stopping by.
Okay. I nodded, putting the page in my hoodie pocket and shaking both of their hands, then wordlessly walking back into my house and walking past my parents, who bombarded me with questions. I didn't answer them, just went to my room and collapsed back on the top of my bed. I pulled the covers back over myself and resigned to dealing with all of this some other day. Making my way back to work the next day, I sighed as I entered the familiar dusty shop. Walking over to the counter and sticking my needle back into the template, I looked back at the basement door, which was eerily silent. I shook my head and reached into my pocket, walking over to Creole's office and knocking 3 times. I stood back a bit and waited for the boss man. He didn't leave me waiting for too long, as he soon opened the door and smiled a big and wide smile when he saw it was me. Travis, how was your day off? I missed you, boy. He chuckled, coming fully out of his office and giving me a hug, which I half-heartedly gave back. It was fine, sir. The police came and told me to give you this, I said, reaching into my pocket and handing him the handwritten note. He looked at it quizzically and took it from me, looking down with his button eyes and that smile on his face growing wide enough to strain the stitches on his mouth. Oh, marvelous. I was beginning to think they'd forgotten about little old me. He chuckled, sticking the note into his suit and smiling at me. I do apologize again for you being roughed up as badly as you were, Travis, he said, putting a hand around me and leading me back to my counter. It's fine, sir. It didn't hurt that badly, I said, rubbing the bruise on my forehead a bit. It only stung if I touched it, really. Lucky for me, my hair is long enough that I can hide it behind my bangs. Pays to never get a haircut sometimes. Good.
I was asleep.
I do enjoy your company in the shop.
Or is she being attacked by a
Even
baby?
your little friend was missing you. He chuckled, tapping the template doll on its head. I looked at it, and for once it wasn't giving me a stink eye. Glad I'm not such an ass to it after all. Keep up the good work, son, Creole said, giving me a firm pat on the back and leaving me to run the front end once again. Doing my usual ringing up of the odd customer, I was soon enough met with something that did make my day a little
Attacked
better.
by a sleeping baby.
Olivia
Yeah, I know,
usually
right?
came back to the shop every Saturday with her new mother, so it's always a little ray of sunshine to see her so happy. "My doll broke," she said with a sad little pout, holding up the doll of what used to be her mom and showing that the arm had indeed come off. "Can Mr. King Creole fix it?" she asked sadly, like this was the absolute end of the world. I looked up at her new mother, who looked at me with this blank gaze. Well, I thought then it was blank. Now, I think it was one of worry and pity. I didn't even have to go get Creole when he threw open the door to his office and came over to Olivia, who ran to him and gave him a hug like he was her long-lost father. He smiled and giggled with her as he took her doll in her hand and led her
Alright,
to
now we
his
can draw the
office.
panda. My hand
"Are
is falling
you
asleep.
aware
Holy crap.
of what awaits you?" Olivia's new mother asked out of the blue, in a soft tone. I looked at her with a confused look. "What do you
You
mean?"
can draw the panda and then
I
the
asked her,
stars?
sitting up in my rocking
Well,
chair,
no.
looking at the
Hold up,
voodoo
no.
template,
This
taking
one
it
I was
off the
gonna
counter
draw
and placing it on the
like a
floor,
hazy,
looking back at her for more information. She looked to the
yellow
wall
color.
of voodoo dolls behind her and leaned in close to me. "He's using you. You need to get out of here
Oh no, not the
before it's too
warning.
late,"
Not the warnings.
she said in a soft, begging tone.
Not the
She
warning.
grabbed me by my hoodie strings and pulled me closer. "Get away," she begged, quickly letting go of me and doing a full 180 of emotions, a big happy smile on her face as Olivia came back with her doll all fixed
Oh,
up.
heck no.
"Be more careful with her, darling. She's fragile," he instructed, giving Olivia a pat on her head and handing her back off to her new mother.
Oh, that's
Olivia
too
nodded
big.
up to the
That's
voodoo
too...
man and took her mother's hand as she was led out of the store. Her mother looked back at me, and a sad look came to her face. After they were gone, I turned to King Creole and mustered all the non-existent strength I had.
All the non-existing strength.
"Why did you hire me?" I asked him, quickly placing the template back on the counter and putting my hands on the dusty surface.
Nice.
The question seemingly caught him off guard as he looked at me like I'd spoken to him in an alien language. He stared at me with those button eyes for a good long time, long enough for me to grow uncomfortable. The same look he gave me when I asked him about the basement.
Oh no.
"I just needed an extra hand," was all he said. "Oh, okay." I nodded quickly, sinking away from his piercing gaze. It felt like every button eye was looking at me in the shop. It was a lifesaver when the front door opened and a customer walked in. Creole instantly turned into his usual happy self and happily granted the person's wish of curing their cancer. Shame about the heart attack they had right afterward. As Creole took hold of the dead body, he dragged it towards the basement and opened the door behind him, grunting as he tried to get a better grip on the cadaver. I was about to offer help to him when a white arm jutted from the darkness of the open basement and wrapped around his neck. "You sneaky whore," he shouted, slipping on the first step of the basement and tumbling backward into the darkness. I watched the whole thing in abject horror. The arm that had grabbed my boss was one of porcelain. I could tell this because of all the shards of it that had fallen off when the two of them went tumbling down. Standing up quickly, I looked down into the basement. An entire pile of porcelain shards waiting for me at the entrance of the door. "Sir," I shouted down into the dark depths, "do you need any help?" I didn't hear anything from him, and I looked down into the darkness. Swallowing the bile building in my throat, I pulled my phone out and turned on the flashlight, clenching my fist as I took my first step into the basement. It took me a whole 30 seconds to take my second step, just out of fear for whatever was going to come towards me in the darkness. "Sir," I shouted into the darkness again, taking a few more liberal steps before I froze.
Let's figure out where
I
this little
shone
thing
my
is.
flashlight down the steps, and I heard a fast scurrying ahead of me. "Oh, screw this," I shouted quickly, turning and booking it upstairs. I managed to get up there and put my hand on the door, flashlight still shining down into the dark. What met me was a woman, body made completely out of porcelain, crawling up the stairs at mock speeds toward me.
Not mock speeds.
She wore a dirty and tattered white dress, and she was missing one of her eyes. I didn't let her get far as I quickly slammed the door in her face and pushed my full weight up against it. "Let me out!" she screamed, smashing her hands against the door. Cracking porcelain hurt as she smashed and beat against it. "Before he wakes up, please!" she screamed, confirming to me that she'd subdued my boss. I closed my eyes and just kept my full weight against the door as she kept on banging. "I can't. I have no choice," I said back, just keeping my eyes closed as she banged and pounded with futility. I didn't know who this creature was, and I didn't want to know. What was going to stop me from ending up like her? So I just kept against the door until she suddenly fell silent. And then a familiar voice came from behind the door. "Open the door, Travis."
"Oh no,"
came the haggard and tired voice of my boss. I cautiously looked at the door and backed away from it.
There we
knob
go.
Turning and the figure of my boss coming out and slamming it shut, locking it with the key and pounding his fist.
Alright, I'm happy with how this guy looks.
"Are you okay, sir?" I asked him, backing up to give him his space. He looked back at me, the stitches to his mouth torn open as he covered it with his hand. Nodding to me, he pointed to something behind me. Looking, I saw the template was holding a spool of thread and needle. Nodding to him, I walked over and gave it to him. He lifted his hand up and quickly started to sew up his mouth. A thick black liquid was dripping from it as he sewed himself back up with expert precision, finishing it up in under 30 seconds flat. "I'm fine, son. She just got the drop on me," he growled, tossing the spool back at me and working his lower jaw. He then turned his attention back to me and grabbed me by the throat, shoving me into the wall and giving me a firm squeeze of my throat. "I told you, never go down there."
He didn't go down.
He snarled at me. I was worried about you," I choked out, trying to pull him off of me, gagging and looking pleadingly at him. He gritted his teeth and dropped me, causing me to gag and choke for air as he walked away. I looked up as he silently walked to his office and slammed the door behind him. Pulling myself up into my rocking chair, I breathed hard, just trying to get my bearing. It took a good hour for me to finally pull my phone out and shakily look at it. What could I possibly do? The police obviously wouldn't help me if they came to me to apologize for them coming here. I had no one to answer anything for me. Except, I looked back at the basement door and walked over to it, stepping over the still dead customer.
The still dead customer.
"I'm sorry. I'm afraid of him. Do you know anything about him? Is there some way to stop him?" I asked into the keyhole. I waited to see if the porcelain woman was still there. I kept waiting, and I was about to give up when a soft voice came back to me. "Charles," she whispered softly. "Charles Sumner." Was all
that looks very
whispered,
cool. Oh, awesome.
going silent again.
Alright, well now it's time to draw the panda then.
I nodded a silent thanks to her
And then I'll add
and went to my counter,
the stars.
pulling up my phone and starting my research. Well, it turned out that the only thing I knew about Charles Sumner was that guy that got beat with a cane in the Senate before the Civil War. So I don't think the internet is going to help me there. I worked the rest of my shift and left without a word to King Creole. But instead of heading straight home, I went somewhere I hadn't been in years. The library. A wealth of knowledge, and the only place I could think that would have anything on my boss. Getting to the reference section, I poured into everything and anything I could. Looking at the newspaper section, the headlines, deaths, famous people from my town, anything about Charles Sumner. And then,
that's not what I wanted.
about an hour before they were about to close, I got a hit. Charles Sumner, 1900 to 1925. He was a pretty famous pianist back in the day, and was even part of a band called the Sumner Orchestra. Other than that, I didn't get too much about him, but it did lead me down a rabbit hole when I saw the only picture of him in the reference book. It was clearly my boss, King Creole, in the flesh. No button eyes, no stitches, nothing. He was no doubt human in this picture.
I'll just draw the arms.
That was surprising. But what surprised me most was the woman standing next to him in the picture, because that was the porcelain woman. She was famous enough to have a caption along with our boy Charles, Mary Simmons, a well-loved singer in the band, and according to the book, Charles's fiancée. I dropped the book when I saw that and stared in disbelief. She was his fiancée. What could she have done to deserve what she was getting? I needed to know more.
Well,
Then,
curiosity kills the cat.
all of the lights in the library cut out.
Oh no.
I looked up quickly, grabbing my phone and turning the flashlight on.
I
clung to it
the
tightly.
fly.
As I looked around quickly.
Jeez.
I looked back at the book and, sorry about this library, ripped the photo out of it, stuffing it into my hoodie and making a break for it, until I found myself falling flat on my face. Looking down, my eyes went wide as I saw a couple of voodoo dolls at my feet, having tied my laces together while I was in the darkness. Oh, give me a break, I shouted, kicking them and quickly ditching my shoes as I made a run for it again. Getting to the front doors, I pulled on them.
Alright,
to no avail.
that's gonna be my base for
I was locked in. Why couldn't the internet have had this information? Now I was going to die in my least favorite place in this stupid town, and that was saying something. Looking around, I had to find a way to escape. I had the idea to head to the fire escape. Looking around, I soon made it to the nearest door and reached out to open it, only for my arm to go completely limp.
Oh no.
I raised a brow before I lost control entirely of
Oh
my body.
no.
I hit the floor with a grunt and looked around in terror as I couldn't move. A million questions were soon answered when a familiar voice came up behind me. "You should have left well enough alone, Travis." Creole berated me from the darkness, the lights coming back on and revealing him standing right next to me. He was holding a voodoo doll that looked exactly like me. He held it in a firm grip, a needle held right up to the doll's neck.
Not a needle up to the neck.
And looked up at him. "I just wanted to know more about you," I shouted, the fear in my voice obvious. But he held a hand up to his mouth to hush me as he knelt down with a doll in his hand. "Use your inside voice, Travis.
I don't know how to draw pandas,
We're in a
friends.
library."
I gotta Google this.
He chuckled, grabbing me by my hair and pulling me up by it. "You want to learn more about me, huh?
Who the heck called me?
Want to know about what that whore did to me?"
Hold up.
He asked, his teeth growing sharp as he talked. He reached into my pocket and pulled out the page I'd ripped from the book. He looked down at it with disgust at first, but also a sense of sadness. "Please, don't kill me," I whimpered, shivering and trying to gain any kind of control back over my body. He looked at me, and then at the paper, tossing it back and giggling like a little child. "I'm not gonna kill you, son. I need you for things," he said, grabbing me by the hair and pulling my head up to meet his button eyes. "But after this little stunt you pulled, it looks like I'll have to put things in motion." He sighed, pulling me up to my feet and tossing the doll of me up and down. "What do you mean?" I asked him, again getting shushed by him. He patted my head and whispered something into the doll's ear. I suddenly got drowsy and struggled to keep myself standing, looking at Creole and then finally passing out. I woke up this morning and gasped, looking around quickly to see where the hell I was. I was in my room. Had I dreamed of all that? The picture of Charles and Mary, however, was still in my hoodie pocket, and that quickly dispelled any idea of a nightmare. I got up and went to the bathroom next to my room and screamed, because looking at my reflection in the mirror were two big black buttons where my eyes should have been. Keeping the door closed on my parents as they attempted to learn why I screamed, I finally convinced them I had seen a giant spider and killed it. When I finally heard their footsteps walk away from the bathroom door, I took another look at myself in the mirror. There was no doubt that my eyes were replaced by buttons. I couldn't blink, not that I really needed to, and I could see much better than I could before. This would have been nice if my eyes weren't buttons. I was stuck. I had to learn more about Creole and learn how to defeat him before I turned
I like
into
King
whatever
Creole
the
better
hell I
when
was
he
about
wasn't
to
angry
turn
at his.
into.
Oh, of course.
I thought about trying to find Olivia's new mother. Unfortunately for me, I had no clue where she lived. I pulled on my hair trying to figure out where she could live. When I had an idea, all of the items that were on her original mother's body were sitting behind the counter at work. This included a cell phone and her wallet, where her ID would be. Great. Back into the lion's den. Suiting up in my hoodie, I ran past my parents shouting that I was late for work and booked it outside. I hope I'll see them again. Making my way to the shop, I gathered all the courage I could and walked into it. I was immediately confused when I saw nobody there. The office door was closed and the basement door was locked shut as usual. Well, at least this part would be easy. Walking over to the counter, I fished around in the container of people's things and soon found what I was looking for. "Sophie," I said aloud, looking at the ID of Olivia's old mother. It contained her address, and it was within walking distance of here. Stuffing the ID in my pocket, I quickly
don't really know
turned
what to do
leave
with this
and walked right into Creole standing behind me. "You do look very distinguished with buttons," he cooed, grabbing my face with his hands and pushing the hood off my head. Looking up at him, I shivered as he stared at me with a happy expression. "You're looking quite pale these days. Are you sick, Travis?" he asked with fake concern plastered all over that pale face of his. Looking down at my hand, I saw that it was quickly becoming the shade of white he was. "What the hell are you doing to me?" I shouted at him, pounding on my chest and finally shoving him off my face. I backed up from him and started to head for the front door. "I need a store clerk. You answered the advertisement, Travis," he said with a chuckle, picking up the voodoo doll of me from the counter. He pulled a needle from his pocket and held it back up to the doll's neck. I froze and looked at him with gritted teeth. Looking behind him, I feigned concern, making it look like Mary had broken free from the basement. He fell for it and looked back at the basement door. He did so long enough for me to chuck Sophie's cell phone, which I'd kept, right into his head, knocking his hat off and staggering him for a bit. Turning, I quickly fled out of the shop and started booking it towards the direction of Olivia's house.
Oh no.
I was hoping that the voodoo doll had a limited range on me, and luckily I think it did, as nothing happened to me as I ran to the neighborhood. I was panting and out of breath, and I looked around to try and find the correct house. Soon enough, I managed to find it and stumbled my way to the door. I knocked on it. "You work with Mr. King Creole," Olivia gasped when she opened the door for me. A look of confusion on her face when she saw me with button eyes and pale skin. "Can I get button eyes too?"
No, little
"I
girl.
need to talk to your mom," I said through exhausted panting. No wonder I'd almost failed PE all those times in high school. She nodded and let me into the house. I looked around and saw that every single picture in the house was of Olivia and her new mother. Not a single one of Sophie existed.
Oops.
"Damn, he's good." "Oh, dear God," came the soft and concerned voice of Olivia's new mother. I looked up at her, grabbing her by the collar of her poofy black dress and shaking her, the desperation clear on my face. "Help me. How do I stop this?"
You
I
can't,
screamed,
buddy.
begging the woman to help me in any way she could. I didn't want to end up like Sophie or all those other people that Creole had killed. "I know his real name, and I know who's trapped in the basement. Please, tell me how to save myself," I shouted again. I do not know. If I speak ill of him, I may." She looked over to Olivia, who was playing in the living room, oblivious to us and in her own little world. She turned back to me and bit her lips. "Go to this address," she said quickly, pulling out a notepad and scribbling on it. "Please tell me it isn't that far," I begged. Having to run here had really wiped me out. "It is, I'm afraid, but it is the only place that may help you," she said, tearing off the sheet of paper and handing it to me. I looked down at it and raised my brow. "Isn't this right near the shop? Won't he know?" I asked her, wondering if she was sending me on a suicide mission. But she shook her head and kept her hands together around
Well,
the
I
notepad.
ruined it.
"He does not go there anymore. You should be safe," she said. And then her face twisted into fear
Oh no.
as she
Oh
covered her
no.
mouth with her hands. The notepad fell to the floor as she backed away from me. I shivered as she did so, scared at what she could have seen. "Why are you blushing, mister?" Olivia asked me, her attention now on me and tilting her head in confusion. Was I blushing? I didn't feel hot enough for that. I pulled my phone out and looked at myself in the camera, and my heart sank in an instant. My cheeks were painted red, like a puppet's. I turned
Well.
and ran out of the house, adrenaline up and completely in panic mode.
Well.
He was turning me into a puppet, and if I didn't stop him soon, it was going to be over for me quickly. I had to find out more about him, and maybe find a way to stop this in the process. Slowing down after a while, I made my way back towards the shop, but instead of making my usual left turn towards it, I continued forward and ended up at a decrepit old building, just like the voodoo shop. They really need to fix up this part of town. The faded old letter read out library, only I had never seen or heard of this one before. Although considering how it looked, I could kinda see why. Sighing and walking in with my head held high, I walked up to the doors
Yeah,
and
you're
found
puppet
them
born.
completely sealed behind wooden boards. Luckily enough for me, there was a broken window right nearby, so I entered the building and began my search. I headed for the reference section, where I found much more information detailing things about Charles Sumner. And let's just say, it's a tale all right. Charles Sumner was born into a poor family, his dad dying of cholera and his mother having to raise him on her own. Luckily for the two of them, Charles's mother was a voodoo witch doctor and very well loved by the community. Charles, meanwhile, became a piano prodigy. At the age of 7, he would go on to make a career of it, and soon enough, by the time he was 18, he was in his own band. Now, he wasn't a millionaire or anything, but it seemed like he was well off. While nice, this information didn't help me at all, and I was about to give up completely and just burn down the whole shop when I suddenly turned to the last page the reference book I was reading had. When I saw in big black letters a headline from a newspaper, "Charles Sumner Missing." Intrigued, I read as best I could the old and decaying page of the book. Charles had gone out with his bandmates and had never returned home. I looked around, trying to find any other information on Charles, Mary, anybody. And then I found it. Mary Simmons and 6 others go missing. I read aloud when I found an ancient newspaper article about it. I looked up when I heard footsteps outside, but it was just some crackheads mumbling to each other. I went back to the paper and read it as best I could. Mary had gone missing about 4 months after Charles did. I stroked my chin at that and looked back at the other books I had thrown around everywhere. His mother, I mumbled to myself, going on a hunch and trying to find a book or something on her if she was so beloved by the community. And I did. Although she retreated from public life after the disappearance of Charles, I did manage to find one interview she gave before then. She blamed Mary for the missing Charles, and more importantly, the missing $10,000 he had won in a contest the night he went out. Gotcha, I said aloud, closing that book and trying to use my mind to piece some things together.
Dude, I really don't know how to draw. Look how
Having a
big
good
this panda
read,
ear is
son,
for no reason.
Creole asked me, sending me flinching into the bookshelf and
Ugh,
staring at him
I wish
as
I
he
knew how to
sat
draw.
up above me and across from me. A really good one, Charles, I shot back at him. The smile on his face disappeared. He growled at me and hopped down to my level, grabbing me by the collar again and slamming me harder into the bookshelf. "Don't call me that," he snarled, lifting up his fist to beat me, only for me to headbutt him and grab a book from the floor, striking my boss in the face with it and pushing him over.
Boss,
He
you don't
tripped,
work for him
but
anymore.
stared back at me with anger and those buttons of his. "What did Mary do? Why do you keep her trapped in the basement?" I demanded to know, lifting the book over my head to hit him again. He looked at me with sharpened teeth and got back up to his feet. He fixed his tie and looked at me like I was a worm that he just stepped on. He grabbed me by the collar again and stared into my button eyes with his own. "That whore deserves everything I gave to her," he snarled, his teeth again growing sharp. In a pure rush of adrenaline, I grabbed his mouth by the stitches and yanked as hard
It looked
as
nice
I
and
could.
cursed before the
I
black
managed to
did.
rip out
You have to
the
add the
entire
black.
length
Pandas
of
have
his
black
suture,
ears and black
causing him to
eyes.
drop
According
me
to
and
this picture
stumble
I'm looking at.
backward. He gagged and coughed as he looked at me with that black ooze dripping out of his mouth much quicker than it had before. Acting quickly, I ran at him, pushing him over with all my weight. I fished inside of his coat pockets as we both stumbled to the floor, and I managed to pull out the 2 items I knew he needed, his spool of black thread and the key to the basement. "Thanks, Charles," I shouted with a chuckle, standing and booking it towards the library entrance. No pun intended there, surprisingly. I heard him scream and shout at me, but when I looked back, he was struggling to stand up. Clearly, ripping those threads out of his mouth did something to him. Making it out through the window I had gone in through, I sighed hard as I looked down at my arms. Still pale as him, but they'd stopped at my elbows, meaning I had bought myself some time from all that. Sighing hard, I now knew what had to be done. I was going in the basement, armed with the key and a rusty pipe I stole from the outside of the library. I started walking towards Old King Creole's. A million things were going through my mind at that moment. Thoughts about Charles, what had happened to him, and what was going to happen to me. Opening the door to the shop, everything was dead silent. Even the rusty bell was much quieter than it usually was. Looking to the wall of voodoo dolls, I saw that they were all starting to rot and fall off the shelves.
Oh no.
I must have really weakened him. Renewed by this, I strode towards the basement and stopped. His office. I looked over to it and changed my course to look through it. Maybe there was something in there. Going into the clean office, I saw most of what I'd seen the first time. A tidy space and scratched
Well,
out
we tried our
pictures.
best, everybody.
Only this time, I
It's
paid
a panda,
attention
okay?
to the pictures, seeing that indeed these
Let me just gotta
were
add
of
some
Charles
stars.
and Mary. Opening up his office desk, I didn't find much of anything. Countless buttons and threads, as well as several pairs of gloves. About to leave, I saw on his desk a picture that wasn't completely scratched out, stood prominently. A picture of a young Charles Sumner and his mother, Mother Creole. Looking out of the office and towards the basement door, I knew that all my answers would come from down there. Walking over, I finally inserted the key and turned it, opening the door and staring down into the darkness. Taking my phone out and turning on the flashlight, I made
Keep
my
pulling my
way
hair out by
down.
accident.
The rickety old wooden steps creaked with every one of my
I really need to get my
footsteps.
nails redone.
I passed several bones and articles of clothing on my way down, and then I finally touched solid ground. I was in the basement after all this time, and it was as freaky and gross as I'm sure you guys imagined. Decaying and rotting bodies laid everywhere.
Ew.
Some hung up by strings like puppets, and others clearly having been chewed on by something. And that something soon caught my attention. The sound of crunching porcelain turned my attention to the corner of the room where Mary sat looking up at me in horror. "He's gotten to you too," she whimpered softly, curling up into the fetal position. What happened to him? Obviously, he didn't just wake up like that, as I did. I demanded to know, keeping a distance from her and waiting for the answer. She curled up tighter.
Oh, that'll do.
And then she finally spoke. "I cheated on him," she mumbled, looking up at me with the one eye she had. Her face was cracked and her right eye was missing, but the other shone off the flashlight I had trained on her. "He was a nice guy, and when he asked me to marry him, I caved, but I was already seeing someone else, a mobster," she mumbled softly. "And you wanted to make him disappear and steal that $10,000? I asked, sort of siding with Creole Charles on this one. "No, that wasn't the plan at all. I told Henry that I just wanted him to get scared and leave town. Henry and his goons took it too far," she said quickly, looking at me and lunging out, grabbing me and shaking me back and forth. "I didn't tell them to torture him." "Wait, torture?" I asked quickly, shoving the porcelain doll off me. She looked fragile, but something had to be chewing at all these corpses down here, and she was the only thing down here. "Yes, those stupid idiots," she mumbled, starting to cry and looking up at me. She held her two hands up and rubbed her messy hair around. They tortured him, beat him, ripped the eyes out of his head, and cut his head off when it was all said and done."
What the frick,
She
bro?
explained, looking up at me for some kind of sympathy. "What? You were just going to sleep with him and steal his money? I don't believe you for a second. He's done horrible things to people. But if you caused that to happen to him, You're no better than him, I said with a huff. It didn't make sense, the way she put it, at least. What? But... she began, obviously trying to fix her lie, but she gave up and sighed, rubbing her cracked face and nodding behind her hands. She looked back up at me, with an exhausted face. Fine. I wanted to get rid of him, but I wasn't strong enough to just come out and say I didn't love him anymore. He spent every single moment of his life playing gigs which I had to sing in, and I hated it. I hated all of that. So when Henry came and swept me off my feet, I decided to be selfish for once in my life. She shouted back at me, stumbling to her feet and staring at me with daggers in her single eye. I guess you didn't expect him to come back as a vengeful voodoo ghost, I snickered, backing up from her and heading back towards the stairs. She followed me, the anger still obvious on her face. If Henry hadn't done such a shit job hiding his body, his mother wouldn't have discovered it and turned him into that freak, she mumbled, turning and looking around the wall she must have looked at for almost 100 years now. Now, I'm nothing but his punching bag, she sighed.
You kind of set the dude up, bro.
He fixes me, then breaks me over and over
Oh my
again.
God, that is horrible.
She despaired. I'm sorry, Mary. I really am. But at the same time, you aren't some innocent victim, I responded. Sorry, Travis, my boy. Your luck's run out. The familiar voice said to me, before something struck me on my head and I lost all control of my body. I flopped to the floor and passed out, his nice dress shoes coming into view just as I lost consciousness. Wakey, wakey, son, Creole hummed,
Daddy?
smacking me hard in the face with a glove. It snapped me awake, and I looked around, instantly trying to move but finding myself stuck and trapped. I looked around and saw I was still in the basement, only I was tied to a table. You gonna cut me in half? I asked, groaning at the stinging pain in my head. I looked at him and realized that he'd lost an eye. Then I saw he'd used the thread from that eye to sew his mouth back up. Unfortunately not. I do need you to be somewhat intact, he said, walking over to me and tapping my nose, smiling as he pulled away. No, Travis, my boy, I do in fact need you alive. Well, sort of.
Oh no.
He chuckled, slamming a heavy bag onto the table on top of my leg, causing me to cry out in pain. Charles, please, he doesn't deserve this. Mary's soft voice spoke up, causing Creole to stop his searching in the bag and look off into a direction I couldn't focus on. He walked off, and the sound of breaking porcelain was more than enough for me to understand what he was doing. Sorry about that, he returned with a chuckle, searching through the bag once again. He smiled nice and wide when he finally found the item he was looking for. He pulled out an ancient drill, the kind you need to crank to be able to use.
This is why I draw pandas backwards,
What are you
so I don't have to like
me?
draw their face,
I asked
which I
him.
might still do. I
He
might
looked
turn
at
this
me
panda around.
with a wide and happy smile as he placed the drill on my exposed palm.
I don't know.
I need a permanent employee, someone who can work hard and never ever take breaks or refuse an order. If you had just
I don't know.
been
What do
a
you
good
think?
little boy, and
Kind of
just
like the other
followed
picture
my
I did
orders,
before.
I wouldn't have had to do this step. But you just had to start snooping, didn't you? He sighed,
I think I did it on my
starting
phone
to
though.
drill into my hand. I'm not
Yeah,
ashamed to
so-
say, I screamed. I screamed and I begged. I thrashed and tried every way possible to try and escape. It wasn't so bad with a second hand. I think I was passing out from blood loss by that point. The feat, lucky enough for me, was a walk in the park compared to the drill into my hands. As I struggled to stay conscious, I saw that he had begun to tie thick pieces of string into the holes of my hands and feet. "You'll make a fine addition to the crew, Travis. You practically look the part." He giggled, his voice distorted as I slipped in and out of consciousness. The feeling of something sharp and cold on my throat brought me back to reality. He had a hacksaw over my throat. "What? No!" I sputtered out. I tried to protest, but I was too weak to move at all. "I'm sorry, son. This is the only way to grant
Pumpkin
you
needs a face. I'm thinking that
immortality.
too. So this is the other one I did.
My head was still intact enough for my mama
This is
to
the
bring
one
me
I
back
just
to
did.
life. So you'll be nice and easy. Just a quick dip in that solution I have whipped up, and you'll be a new man." He chuckled,
You see how it's
pressing the
easier to draw a
hacksaw hard
panda
on
if
my
your face
throat
isn't showing?
and starting to saw into me.
So I'm
The
thinking about
first
doing
few
this
goes
again, of just
were
like
on a
turning the
scale
panda
of pain
around.
you could never imagine. But by the time he cut into my spinal cord, I was already dead. "Wakey, wakey,
Yeah,
son.
I'll do the pumpkin for
You've
you.
got to stop falling asleep on me." Creel's soft and loving voice spoke to me as I regained my consciousness. I looked around and saw that I was sitting up on the table. I looked down at myself, startled when I saw I was in my own black suit. My tie was red, unlike Creel's purple. "I'm alive?" I asked, looking over to him and touching my throat. I found a long row of stitches all across it, like his. "Yes, indeed, sonny." He chuckled, smacking my back and pulling my attention over to a large black cauldron nearby. "Mama's old recipe. A quick dip of your head in there, and you can kiss mortality goodbye." He chuckled, pulling me to my feet and helping me stand straight. I quivered at the thought that I'd been dead, but even more so when I looked down at the strings tied to my hands and feet. "What am I?" I asked him, looking over at him and wanting to cry, despite my clear lack of eyes. He looked back at me with a big yellow smile, pulling me close with his arm around my neck. "You're my store clerk, son, and my own personal puppet." He chuckled, lifting up a mirror and showing me myself. I did start crying then, even if no tears came back. My face was pale and the red cheeks bright and vibrant. My normally messy hair was nice and combed downward. "Now you're going to work with me here. Forever," he said, stepping back and smiling as he motioned for me to go up the stairs. I looked up and refused to take a single step until the string tied around me went tight and some unseen force began to pull me upstairs. I tried to fight it. I tried so hard. I tried running out the door, running far away into the arms of my parents so I could wake up from this nightmare. But I had no such luck. The force made me go to my counter
The
and stand there.
force.
Just stand there, unable to move. "I just want to go home," I mumbled, still crying as Creole made his way back upstairs. He looked my way with a smile and a chuckle. "Now, Travis, we can't have a sad store clerk. Let's fix that." He snapped his fingers and smiled at me. "Of course not, King Creole, sir," I said happily,
There's your pumpkin
saluting
face.
him and smiling back.
Now I really gotta
My
change
mouth and
the
body may
panda.
have
The
said
panda's the
that,
only thing
but
that's
my
like
mind was
sore
screaming
thumb right
and
now.
wanting to strangle him
Everything
with
else
the
looks pretty
strings
good.
keeping me held upright. Atta boy, Creole hummed, clapping his gloved hands together and heading into his office, leaving me standing there with no way to sit down or do anything. Just stand there and smile like an idiot. I can only control myself at night when he locks the shop and spends all his time down in the basement. I'm allowed to sit and do whatever I want. But the second I approach the door, my invisible handler forces me back to my post. This is my life now. The puppet in King Creole's sick little games. All I can do is smile and thank you for coming in. I can't scream for help or anything. I'm trapped here, and I can't find any way out. Help me, please, help, and make sure to visit Old King Creole's half-priced voodoo shop. We have everything you could ever want. King Creole is a lovely boss and is more than happy to grant any wish you could ever want. And I'm more than happy to clean up anything you leave behind.
Well, there's that. So, believe it or not, there's a part 2. I know the switch triggered me the first time I heard it. I was like, oh no, not him actively crying for help and then switching because he doesn't have cognizance anymore. Like, owie. So you want part 2? Or you want to save it for another time? Because we're at the 2-hour mark. We can end stream now. We can keep going. What do you wanna do? Boo boo doo boo. What do you wanna do? Ba doo ba doo doo. What do you wanna do? Ba doo doo. What do you wanna do? Ba doo da doo doo. Bow. What do you wanna wiggity wig? What do you wanna wiggity wig? What do you wanna do? Do da do do. Oh, okay, we can save it for tomorrow. That's fine. Am I saving the drawing for tomorrow too? Because it's part 2 of this, so it's also, you know, the same vibe type situation. In that case, yeah, no, maybe a little bit. So we can save it for tomorrow if you'd like. I don't know if Alice Damon plans on streaming today, earlier in the day, or whoever. Guess we could check. I guess we could see who's on Twitch. Nobody we know. I mean, it's a bunch of people we know, but nobody like we are close to is alive. So the drawing looks good. What are you saying? What are you saying? What are these words you're saying? She's streaming so late this week. Yeah, I don't know what's up with that. So this is where we're at with the drawing so far, but I definitely think I'm gonna turn the panda around. Yeah, I think I'm gonna turn the... Thanks for streaming? Alice, you just can't come in at the end tell me thanks for streaming. Where have you been the whole stream, bro? She's alive. Exactly, bro. Alice, are you streaming today? Been napping because the baby found you slept through my whole stream, bro. Hello? So are you not streaming today? Okay. Well, Trolls was saying that I could end stream, but like, why am I in the stream if nobody else is streaming? Yeah, I was gonna stream for Bamboo Bay later too, but I was just gonna stream, you know, for a while, cause YouTube, I need watch time. So if I have the time, I like to just keep going, and like, you know, for this particular piece, I need to just turn the panda around. And then we'll be good, like do some like little touches here and there. But I'm trying to figure out like what you guys want. Okay, so Alice isn't streaming today other than the Bamboo Bay. So Alice, now that you're awake, are we going to part 2 of the story? And then we'll do, what's tomorrow, Friday? I'm not really, I probably will be free later in the day on Friday. Oh, this beat just dropped. Let's go. Hey, 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 hey. Bounce, bounce, bounce. Part 2? That's what I think too. I think we should just jump into part 2, go ahead and finish it out. And then tomorrow, not tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow. Tomorrow night. What can we do? I could read a story. I could read a scary story. Or we can do some more creepypasta art combo. I'll let you guys vote on it on Twitter. So if you don't already follow me on Twitter, go ahead and do that. It's Melisma VT. I'm Melisma VT everywhere. So basically, if you want to follow me, just put in Melisma VT. You'll probably find me. Or you can just Google Melisma VT. Most of my socials come up. Alright, part 2 it is then. Is that okay with you, Trolls, or you got somewhere else to be? Alice, how do you want to watch part 2 if you fell asleep through part 1? I guess we'll just answer any questions you have. Alright, so here's part 2. And also, I just realized there are, this video does move. It's just not like an animation. It's just like a B-roll slides, but you can't see it. Because once I minimize and switch to doing art, it freezes. So you actually don't really see anything. Only thought of napping so I would be awake for the bamboo part, but I'm here. Oh, so you guys would take turns napping. Okay, that's fine. The magic of YouTube is you can nap now, Trolls, to the sultry sound of my voice and this creepypasta, and then you can just watch it again later. Because honestly, I need y'all to rewatch all of my VODs so that I can get the watch time for it. So yeah, go ahead and nap, Trolls. Alice just napped, so she's awake now, so Alice can pick up where you left off. Spam in the chat, and yeah, you can wake up in time for the Bamboo Bay crew, which is not till 7. I'm only going to stream for 2 more hours, so when this video is done, and then we'll be over. I did watch the other VOD I missed. Good, 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 perfect. So sleep well, my boy, and we'll see you at the Bamboo Bay crew. Alice, let's jump into part 2, and if you're confused at any point, just ask, and I'll explain it, because a lot of stuff happened, but only like a few things are important for you to be able to understand. Okay, okay.
Welcome back to Old King Creole's half-priced voodoo shop. Ugh, now I'm even starting to say this shit. Hey guys, it's me, Travis. Still alive, unfortunately, and losing my sanity little by little every day. I know you guys probably have a lot of questions as to how the hell I'm even able to talk to you guys right now. And I promise I'll get into that, as painful as it is to talk about. But if you're new here, then allow me to introduce myself.
You see the video, Trolls? It's a video.
My name is Travis. I work here at Old King Creole's half-priced voodoo shop, and because of my own stupidity,
I've ended up becoming a human puppet for my boss, King Creole. And when I mean puppet, I do mean puppet. I'm suspended by strings from the ceiling, and my face is white as
Bit
chalk,
nappy
and I've got
naturals.
stupid red cheeks painted on. During work hours, my mind is sort of disconnected from my body. My body and mouth say things that my mind doesn't want to say. I'm basically the most disgusting thing in history, an overly cheery store clerk. Sometimes I want to punch myself with how sick and disgusting I sound,
Wow.
being a stupid puppet for my boss. The only time I get to take back control of myself is when the shop is closed. Although whenever I try to leave through the doors, I'm quickly taken over again and forced back to my post at the counter. And yes, I have tried to end it all. Whatever force is pulling on the strings attached to my body forces myself to end any attempt on my own life. So, I'm stuck here being the boss's puppet. Some of you asked if my parents ever came looking for me.
Oh.
And yes, they did. A couple of days after I was turned into a puppet, I was standing at my counter, a stupid smile plastered on my face as I looked around with my button eyes. Quickly, I stood stick straight when King Creole came out of his office. His stitched-up mouth was turned up into a smile as he approached me.
"How are you doing, Travis, my boy?"
Travis!
He asked me with a chuckle, giving me a hard pat on the back. I turned my head to him and just smiled nice and wide back at him. "I'm doing fantastic, sir," I said happily,
I know that looks
while
scary.
internally I was screaming every curse word I knew at him, wishing I could rip his stupid head off his shoulders and punt it down the basement with Mary. He chuckled and nodded at me.
"Say, I need you to go into the basement for just a second. I left something down there when I was tending to Mary. Could you be a dear and go get it?"
He asked me, standing back and offering me the key to the basement. I reached out and took it, even giving him a little salute. "Sure thing, sir," I hummed, walking over to the basement and opening it. While my body readily gave into his orders, in my head I thought of why the hell he was sending me down here. Nothing was important enough for me to go down here. And I got my answer the second I closed the door behind me. The rusty bell rang at the door, and I heard the sound of a couple of people coming in. And I heard the voice of my mother. "Are you King Creole?" she asked. Her tone was of sorrow and insecurity. I turned on my heels quickly, staring back at the door. My mother was here. I reached out towards the door, but found myself unable to close the small distance to touch the knob. I wanted to force myself to stretch my stupid hands just a couple of inches closer, but I couldn't.
"Why, yes I am, ma'am."
Creole chuckled, the sound of my rocking chair squeaking, as he was no doubt sitting in it and rocking in it.
"What can I do for you?"
he asked my mother. My father spoke up instead. "Our son went missing a few days ago, and we were wondering if you've seen him anywhere." His heavy voice was also heavily covered in sadness and worry. I was just a couple of feet away from them, and I couldn't do anything to draw attention to myself. I opened my mouth to try and scream, but nothing came out of my throat but a long, soft wheeze.
"Well, he was here the last day I had him scheduled to work. He left, and that was the last I ever saw of him."
Creole lied through his teeth, a tone of concern on those stitched-up lips of his.
"I truly don't know where he is."
Wow, he just straight up
explained.
lied.
"We understand. If you see or hear from him, please just give us a call," my dad said to the man who was torturing me. I could hear a sheet of paper from the other side of the door, and the sound of my mom crying softly. I was
That's so
alive.
sad.
I was right here. Just open the damn basement door.
I sure will. He's a fine young lad. I do hope he turns up.
Creole said to my parents. Soon, their footsteps grew faint, and the front door opened and closed, that rusty bell jangling and signaling the last I ever saw of my parents. Finally able to move again, I clawed at the basement door and opened it up.
Oh, Travis, you just missed your mama and pops. Such nice
Oops.
people worrying about their son.
He chuckled when he saw me standing at the basement door. He was holding up a missing persons flyer at me, showing my old face, before my button eyes, pale skin, painted cheeks, and my severed head getting stitched back on. "Oh, that's too bad," I said in my happy tone, my mind practically screaming and begging to be let out of this prison. Is this what someone in a coma feels like?
Probably.
Or people who get trapped in their bodies and are unable to move?
I'm sure they'd love to see you. Who knows? Maybe I'll pay them a visit one day.
Oh no.
If you ever misbehave.
Oh no.
After all, I know where they live now.
Oh
He
no.
giggled, holding up a flyer of my past self and showing that my address was plastered onto it. You monster, I thought. You won't have to worry about that at all, sir, I said. I would never do something that stupid. I nodded, smiling as I was forced to turn back around and head down to the basement. Creole's giggles filled my ears as I descended into the dark depths. Finally arriving down in the basement, I looked around for whatever the hell it was that he'd left down here. While I was down here, I saw the Voodoo King's old fiancée and murderer, Mary, the living human porcelain doll, who was currently busy chewing on the rotting corpse of one of the dead customers.
Travis, what are you doing down here?
She asked, quickly swallowing the meat in her mouth.
Ew.
Normally I'd be gagging and throwing up all over myself, but my body didn't react at all to that. Plus, I'm always wearing a nice suit, and getting vomit off that would be a bitch. He sent me down here for something. I sighed, finally having some control over myself as I walked over to her, looking at her and then at the corpse she was munching on. I won't blame her for that. A girl's gotta eat, you know? "Oh, he must want his cane," she sighed, pointing over to the item laying on the floor near some cracked and broken porcelain. I nodded and walked over to the item, picking it up and looking at it. It was a simple one made of some black wood with a white orb handle. "I'm guessing he beat you with it, didn't he?" I asked her, looking over and staring with my button eyes, finding myself hitting the orb against my palm. "Yeah," she said simply, turning back to her chewing and ripping another chunk out of the decaying body. I looked at her, and then down at the cane, sighing and trying to wrap my head around how the hell my life had gotten to this point. I should have gone to college. I left Mary to her cannibalism and started the path
Nice
back
panda.
up the stairs.
Yeah, I
Getting
had to
up
turn
there,
them
I handed
around.
the item to
I only
Creole,
could draw
and
pandas
he
backwards.
smiled at me.
Thank you, son.
He hummed, taking it and looking down at it. "Anything for you, sir," I said with a smile, shivering internally when his head jerked up to look at me with a quizzical look.
Anything, huh?
He asked me with a hum, stroking his chin and standing up quickly, putting both of his hands on my shoulders and giving them a hard squeeze.
Like killing your parents for me?
He asked me. I froze. I couldn't. There was no way in hell I was going to do that. I opened my mouth to no doubt agree with him, like the stupid doormat I'd become, but instead, I grabbed him by the head and smashed my own into his,
Hello?
sending him sputtering backward.
Still have some fight in you, huh?
He asked me with a chuckle, holding up the cane and bringing it down on my head, sending me stumbling to the floor like I was a doll. Because I am one. He raised it up to
Yeah,
deliver
no,
another one to
absolutely
me
insane.
when the door again opened and we both looked towards it. "Is this a bad time?" the customer asked. A girl wearing an oversized hoodie. Creole looked down at me and then at her, placing the cane on the floor and walking over to her, the cane tapping along as he went.
"I'm sorry, dear. What can I do for you?"
he asked with a hum. I, meanwhile, was forced back up by my strings and standing up nice and straight for our customer, brushing myself off and heading back to the counter to stand there like the animatronic I was basically becoming. You grant wishes, right? Can you get a guy to like me?" she asked shyly. Creole chuckled and nodded slowly, wrapping an arm around her and pushing her over to the counter.
"Travis, be a dear and get Miss Liz here the love potion,"
he asked of me with a giggle. I quickly nodded back and reached out to give the woman the potion she asked for. God, I wish I could have talked her out of it. The love potion is probably the worst potion we sell here, especially if you're as vague as this girl was about it. She took it and looked at the vial it came in, looking at Creole dubiously and reading the back of the bottle. Smart girl. Nodding to herself, she opened it and quickly drank it, gagging at the taste, but swallowing it all. She stood there for a bit recovering, and soon her phone went berserk. It vibrated like crazy, and she pulled it out quickly, a smile spreading on her face when she saw it was from the guy she loved. She thanked the two of us and ran off, putting the phone to her ear and chuckling as she left the shop. The poor girl had no idea what she was getting into. Every single time someone uses the love potion, the person they love ends up killing them and doing weird shit to their body, saying that they love them so much they wanted to keep them always. Yeah, making a creepy human statue out of their body is totally showing love. Creole must want to marry me after what he did to me. Let's see what happens to her. She'll probably come running back here in no time. I'll keep you guys posted if she does end up back here. Creole must have been in a good mood, because he didn't end up beating me again, just going off to the office and closing the door, leaving me to stand there at my post. He doesn't go anywhere at night, if you guys are wondering. He just stays in the office until the shop opens up again. But that gives me a chance to rest, curled up under the desk. No reason other than to cry.
Aww.
Well, my button eyes don't really produce tears, but my body does everything else that crying entails. I don't know how to get away from him, but there has to be a way. If I can smash my face into his, there has to be a way to be able to break the spell he has on me. I'll get out of here, and I'll rip his head off. I swear I will. And do be sure to check us out. King Creole has been talking about getting more employees. Hope to see some of you here.
Heck no, you ain't gonna see
You know what I
somebody
miss
here.
the most ever since becoming a puppet? Using the bathroom. As weird as it sounds, having at least some kind of privacy inside a room with a toilet for me to sit down. I've never taken something for granted so hard as being able to sit down from my own free will. The stupid strings keep me suspended and forced to stand up straight. It makes the days long not being able to sit down by myself. King Creole has been treating me worse than usual lately. I don't know if I did something, or he's still mad about me smashing my face into his. But now, every day before we lock up shop, he puts his arm around me and invites me down into the basement. Since I was so curious about it, he drags me down there and forces me to stand there and watch while he uses all types of things to beat Mary. Look, I may have thought before that she deserved whatever she was getting from Creole, but seeing it day after day, it's starting to make me afraid for myself. What happens when he starts treating me like her? She's porcelain, and to some extent, she's grown numb to everything. Me, on the other hand, I'm human. Or I guess my body is pretty much human. And I've seen what Creole does to humans that piss him off. One day before lockup, I was doing my usual standing at the counter, wondering of ways to end my eternal suffering, when the bell at the shop door clanged, bringing my button eyes over to the person who had just wandered into our lovely shop. I saw a heavyset guy, tall and bundled up in a jacket since it was so cold. He looked at me with about
know,
as
right?
much discomfort as I usually had towards myself whenever I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. "Hello, sir, and welcome to Old King Creole's half-price voodoo shop," I sang in my stupid greeting voice. All the while, subconsciously, I was telling this guy to stick a knife in my heart and end me. Not too different from when I was a human working here, now that I think about it. "Yeah, whatever, you freak. Is your boss here? I'm told he can make problems disappear," the guy said, looking around the shop and sneering at all our items, and probably all the cobwebs everywhere. Although I've never seen a spider here, and I live at the shop now, I have no idea how they show up here. "He sure can. I'll go fetch him right away," I said cheerily. The strings attached to me forced me to walk over to the office and tap it lightly to a little tune. God, I wanted so badly to just smash my face into the wall when I was forced to act like this. "Oh, sir, we have a customer looking for you," I said happily, stepping back when the door flung open. Creole smiled with the stitches on his mouth, giving a nice creaking sound as they threatened to snap. He waltzed over, patting my combed hair like I was a dog, and heading to the counter to meet with this man that had wandered into our shop.
What can I do for you, Paul?
He asked with a cheery
He's
laugh.
like evil Santa Claus.
His gloved fingers drummed on the counter as he looked at the man and waited for an answer. The man gave the same look to Creole he gave me before shrugging and handing him a business card to the voodoo shop boss. "Yeah, my buddy Pat says that you can make problems go away," he said, crossing his arms that rested on his beer gut and waiting for Creole to respond. He seemed shifty, like the kind of guy you'd see on wanted posters, or the kind you look out for if you belong to the neighborhood watch.
"Ah, of course. What is the nature of your problem? I do hope it's easier to solve than Patrick's was. Quite a mess he got himself into."
My boss
no.
said, looking over to me and motioning me to come over, the strings yanking me, since I really had no choice but to obey him. "Yeah, I need to lay low for a couple days. Feds are on my ass about some sexual assault allegations."
Oh, heck no,
Paul
not
explained.
sexual assault.
Creole nodded, the drumming of his fingers stopping once Paul finished.
"Well, I can offer you my basement, but it is becoming quite full down there."
My boss thought aloud, holding his chin. His button eyes scanned this man, but soon the smile he always had plastered on his face went away, and a look of disgust came across it.
"On second thought, I can squeeze you in."
He chuckled, walking past me and patting me on the shoulder as he led the man to the basement door.
Let me use Patty real quick.
"Travis, be a good boy and close up shop for the night,"
he said to me as he unlocked the basement and allowed Paul
I
to
think the
enter
model stays
first.
there.
I looked at him and quickly nodded. Being dragged over to the door, I flipped
No,
the
she
sign
does.
to say we were closed, and I locked it. Turning my attention back to the basement door, I realized I'd regained control of my body. I took that glorious opportunity to stretch as I've never done before. God, the feeling of my popping joints felt incredible now. Taking this slim window of opportunity, I walked into the boss's empty office, looking around for anything to aid me in my current predicament. I didn't have much luck since once again the only item King Creole has in his office seems to be sewing supplies, and I don't think any of that is going to help me here. My attention turns from his office to the basement when I hear Paul start to scream, along with hard smacks and the sound of something wooden breaking.
Travis, get down here, boy.
Creole's voice ordered me, forcing my body to stand up perfectly straight and forcing me down the basement. The best way I can describe the feeling is sleep paralysis, being unable to move at all while freaking the hell out. Walking down into the basement and reaching the end, I almost wanted to do a 180 and start walking back up the stairs. Paul was being hung by a meat hook from the wall,
Oh no.
and Creole was slowly sharpening a knife on a nearby whetstone.
Oh no.
His look was one of anger until he saw me, and then that scowl flipped into a big, wide smile.
There you are, boy.
"Hello, sir. What are you doing with the customer?" I asked, surprisingly for once being able to agree with whatever my mouth asked. Creole chuckled as he walked over to me and grabbed me by my combed hair, stroking the now extremely sharp knife against my stitched-up neck. I backed up a bit, but he pulled me back into it.
Why, I'm making the problem disappear,
Oh
he
well.
said with a soft, low hum. Creole approached the man, placed the knife on his stomach,
Oh no.
and dug it deep into him,
Oh
causing
no.
a silent scream from the man.
Oh no.
"I'm sure you're going to give him the swift justice he deserves, sir," I said, clapping my hands and smiling at him like
Oh,
the
no.
kiss-ass he turned me into. Now, I've got a pretty in-depth understanding of how Creole's morality works. He'll never harm a child, but will harm their parents if he deems it worthy of his intervention. Anybody coming into the store and asking for a wish is instantly damned for being selfish, no matter the wish. And he absolutely despises molesters and rapists. Guess this guy filled one of those categories. My attention was turned from the torture in front of me to Mary, who motioned for me to come over. I looked over to Creole and was able to force my body to walk over to the porcelain woman. I looked down at her as she struggled to keep herself up, her legs having been broken into shards and barely back together. "He'll be at this for a couple hours," she sighed, offering me a spot to sit down. I looked at it and sat down. She pulled herself onto a pile of clothes and sighed as she brushed back her wild and messy blonde hair. "Molester. He'll take his sweet time with this one,"
Jeez.
she explained to me, looking over with her single eye. Despite all the times she was put back together, she always had a hole where the right part of her face and eye should have been. "What's he gonna do with them?" I asked, trying to make conversation with a woman in a similar predicament to me, although she had suffered for far longer than I have. "Peel off his skin,
Oh no.
use it to make voodoo dolls, and leave the rest of him to me,"
Oh no.
she sighed. The weight of her decades of torture weighed heavily on her. When I raised a hand to comfort her,
Oof.
she immediately shirked away from me and silently shook her head. She didn't like to be touched at all. I can understand where she's coming from.
Oh no,
"Is
my
there
dog
any
is
way to
barking.
save ourselves?" I asked her, hoping for any bit of information she had, but she simply responded with another silent shake of her head, a chip of porcelain falling off her face and onto the floor. She gave up decades ago. "What was he like before this?" I asked, looking up as Creole cackled in delight as he sliced off the man's skin.
Oh no.
Well, at least I agreed with his actions here. Truth be told, I would have asked for a turn if I knew how to skin properly. But maybe that's just my slowly slipping sanity talking. An idiot. A sweet, adorable idiot who was too stupid for his own good. She sighed hard, rubbing her cracked face and letting out a long, haggard breath. "He was sweet. He really was. A mama's boy who brought me back to my house on time. And showed up on time exactly on the dot," she said with a sad sigh.
Man,
"So,
you ruined that.
why did you do it?" I asked her, my button eyes turning my attention from the torture in front of me over to her. It still made no sense for me, as to why she would kill Charles Sumner and lead to his transformation into King Creole. I was young and stupid. Charles was such a prude that he wouldn't have sex until we were married. I wouldn't have cared as much if he didn't drill it into me every single day. She groaned, both of us receiving a stink button from Creole as he turned to see what we were doing. But he quickly turned back to having his fun with Paul, starting to cut into his face.
Oh, no.
So, you asked your mob boyfriend to kill him? I asked her, seeing that she was indeed a selfish whore.
I'm gonna go
In
check on my dog
Creole's
since he's
own
making a lot
words,
of noise.
not my own. It wasn't supposed to go like that. I just wanted Henry to beat him up enough to scare him into leaving town, but then Charles had to go and win that contest. When Henry found out about the 10,000, he wanted it, and so he tortured Charles into giving it to him. Then he told me that they'd accidentally killed him. She explained, sitting up and looking at me with her glass green eye, looking at me with the most sincerity I'd seen from her. I take it that Mama Creole didn't take too kindly to her son being murdered. I asked her, using the distraction that Creole was having as getting some much-needed information from a primary source. Not at all, she said with a soft chuckle, the kind a person gives when they realize how bad their situation actually is. I know that chuckle real well. She suspected me from the start, and since Henry was such an idiot and didn't hide the body at all, she found Charles, and the rest is my horrible history. She explained. She really was a flawed person, but was I any better? I helped my boss cover up murders, got rid of bodies for him. I wasn't really better than her, I guess. Is she still with us? Is she an immortal voodoo creation like her boy? I asked, looking for any way to get out of our situation, but she responded with a shake of her head. She died in 1960, I think. Old age. Creole was devastated. He didn't come down here for over 6 months. She didn't want immortality, so she just went quietly into the ether. She sighed, flinching when a chunk of human meat was flung at the two of us. Both of us looked up in terror when Creole pointed the blood-soaked knife at us.
Do not speak of my mother, you filthy whore,
he snarled, lifting his leg up and stomping her face in, sending the girl flying backwards into the pile of bones that was behind us. He next turned to me and pointed the knife right at me. I raised my hands to show I meant no harm, but he just chuckled at me.
There's no way you're getting out of your situation, Travis. You're my special store clerk, my good little boy, and my very own puppet.
He smiled, snapping his finger, my body going stiff again and being forced to stand up straight. You are correct, sir. I am at your eternal service, I said with my stupid yes-man tone, wanting so badly to rip that knife from his gloved hand and plunge it into his chest. But all I could do was smile like a jackass and follow his order to take all the skin he'd peeled up to his office. Taking it in my hands, I started up the stairs and sighed. This was going to be my life now, wasn't it? The slave of an undead voodoo man. Why did I have to be an idiot and get involved in this? I was about to start making $30 an hour. Why did I have to ruin all this? I thought all this as I came upstairs and was face to face with a police officer. We looked at each other before we both looked down at what I had in my hands, then back up at each other. Well, how the hell would I explain this? Turns out, I didn't have to. I'm here to wish for something, the woman said. She was middle-aged, looked like she was a hard-ass, but her tone of voice really sent me back. I looked down at the skin in my hand and thought for a second. Yeah, let me just put this away and I'll get my boss. I said, far enough away from Creole for me to be able to control my actions. Going to the office, I thought to myself, for some reason, I wondered if she was going to be my way out of here. Well, I had some hope for the first time in a while. I should have known not to. Walking down the basement with this police officer, I did my best to act as naturally as I could, with strings being constantly tied to me. She was obviously uncomfortable with me, but if she's a cop, she most likely knows about King Creole. If that one time that cop tried to arrest the two of us is any indication, then the whole police force knows what goes on in here. I finally made it down the steps with her in tow, watching as Creole was beating Mary with his cane for probably the same reason he had been before. "Sir, this officer has a wish," I said, for once in my normal voice. He must have been so upset that he wasn't even bothering to control me at that moment. He looked up at me with a scowl on his face, before staring at the officer. His button eyes went from her to me, then down to Mary, whose face was barely held together from his vicious beatings.
"Ah, Officer Kilpatrick, you're early. Our appointment wasn't until 7.
He chuckled, taking his top hat off and running his fingers through his black, messy hair, putting the item back on, and walking closer to us. Pointing his thumb back at Mary, he moved his head towards her, the sign for me to move Mary out of sight. Nodding, I went over and gently picked Mary up. She's light as a feather, mostly since her body is hollow on the inside, I'm pretty sure at least, and I carefully placed her in the corner of the room, careful not to put her down too hard and risk more pieces of her falling off. "I know, but I got off early, so I figured I might as well just come here." She crossed her arms and looked at the voodoo shop owner. "We had a deal. I made sure that your missing clerk wouldn't be investigated thoroughly. Now you owe me my wish," she said, her eyes traveling to see me staring back at her. That couldn't be possible, I thought to myself. Creole had too much influence that no one was ever going to come looking for me. This officer had been my one chance at getting out of this hell. But it turned out she had signed my eternal damnation here.
"Yes, dear. I'm well aware of our little deal."
Creole chuckled, brushing some porcelain off his suit and staring at the middle-aged officer in front of him.
"You want your precious little daughter back."
He sighed, looking at her, with his back to me. She kept looking over at me, tending to Mary, and obviously feeling guilty about what she'd done. "You can do that, right? And not have her ending up like a freak like you two?" she asked, pointing to the two of us and waiting for an answer. Gonna be honest, that one hurt. Being compared with Creole really hurt.
"If that's what you wish. But that is particularly hard to do, and for that, I'm gonna need her body."
Creole explained, walking past her and over to the basement stairs.
"And I'll need your help with that, Officer Kilpatrick,"
he said with a toothy grin, those stitches strained to breaking once again. "Why can't you send your little puppet?" she snuffed, pointing to me again and once again chipping away at my soul and causing me to turn my gaze away from them and look back to Mary, who patted my chest to make me feel a little better.
"Oh, I'm afraid Travis isn't allowed outside of the shop. I will accompany you if you so wish. Her body must be brought back here, of course. Otherwise, I'm unable to perform the required ritual to bring her back,"
Creole explained, tapping his fingers on his cane, clearly waiting for this woman to get a move on things. "Fine," she said with a long sigh, walking past him and up the stairs. Creole turned his button eyes back at me, and I felt
Sorry,
the
Alice,
strings
I'm back.
pull tight.
I didn't really
was
leave.
forced
I
to
just
stand
muted,
up
so I was
straight
trying to figure out
once
plans of
more.
whether I'm leaving the house or not.
"Travis, dear, be a good boy.
Plus,
and
you were
close
quiet
up
in the
shop.
chat.
I'll be back within the hour.
He ordered me, leaving before I could give him any kind of stupid-ass kissing response. I sighed as I was allowed to go limp again. Waiting until I heard the front door open and close, I then turned back to Mary.
You've got a chance to look for a way out,
she said, picking up some of her pieces. She sighed as she got a good amount of her face back into a decent shape. Is there going to be any way out of here? I asked her, raising a brow. I got a shrug back.
Told
and
you
it
this
looked like
baby
I
be
was an
wilding.
idiot.
I haven't
my
left
Lord.
this basement in almost 95
Still wait
years.
for my Honda to be
How
home after
should
the
I
story.
know?
She rolled her one eye. Damn, she got me. Pouting a bit as I turned to go upstairs, I looked back at her, then smiled. She may be older than everyone I know combined, but old girl still has some bite in her. Making my way back upstairs, I did my only order and locked up the shop, looking around at the dusty and cobweb-filled place with my button eyes and trying to find any kind of way out. Like always, I couldn't get out the front door. Once again, I had no luck. Turning my head, I looked at the voodoo dolls on the wall and thought for a second. Any of you guys want to help me out here? I asked them, getting silence back. Well, it was worth an ask. I looked back over at the boss man's office and resigned myself to try and look in there for anything that could help me out of here. Opening up his desk again, I once again couldn't find anything useful. How does he not have any scissors? How the hell does he cut shit? Resigning again, I sat in his office chair and looked around at all the pictures. Picking up one of them on his desk, I looked at it. It was old and weathered, but I could see that it was Charles and his mother. Made sense that this was the only picture of himself that he hadn't destroyed. He really must have loved his mother. I miss mine so much. Setting the picture down, I sighed and rubbed my face, my fingers going down and scratching the stitches on my neck. Something deep down in me wanted to rip off the stitches. Maybe that would kill me, since the fact that I wasn't able to just do it and the invisible force was keeping me from doing it. I think that it just might. Well, if I'm ever able to get to fight Creole in a fistfight, I know where to go for. They were gone for a good while, and when they finally came back to the shop, I was out of the office and standing at the corner like I usually do. Creole walked through and
Right,
held
back
the
to
door
trying to
open
perfect these
as
panda
Officer
ears.
Kilpatrick brought her daughter's casket into the shop.
Oof,
Dirt
casket.
dripping onto the floor
Hello?
and causing me to exhale through my nose in annoyance. I'd probably have to clean that.
Travis, be a good boy and help Mrs. Kilpatrick with her luggage.
Creole
Luggage.
said. I nodded and walked over, holding one end of it and helping her as we both were led down to
Oops.
the basement. Getting down there, I placed the coffin down, giving her the stink eye, as best I could with button eyes. She was still uncomfortable looking at me, and backed up when we placed the coffin down. Do I have to be here to watch? She asked, hugging herself and backing away from the coffin. Creole walked over and grabbed it, cracking it open and looking down into it, smiling as he saw the corpse in there. I walked over and peeked in. Yep, that was a dead child, all right.
Yikes.
A rotting dead child at that.
Yikes.
Thank God I can't smell things anymore.
Yikes.
Well, you don't have to, but it will help with the ritual if you do.
He chuckled, picking up the corpse and placing it on the same table he'd used to turn me into a puppet. Well, this was sure going to be fun to watch, especially with the maggots crawling in and out of her body.
Ew.
It was obviously too much for Kilpatrick, since she started gagging and throwing up. Yep, super glad I can't smell or taste things anymore. Creole went to work, straightening the body out and nodding. He then looked over to me with a smile and beckoned me to come closer to him. I obeyed and walked over, leaning in so he could whisper to me.
Bring that skin I had you place in my office,
He said,
Ew.
pulling back and shooing me away. Well, now I've been downgraded to errand boy. Sighing, I obeyed and made my way back up the stairs, picking up all the things he would need, the skin, threads, needles, etc. Making sure everything was in my arms, I made my way back downstairs, placing them on the table for my boss. He nodded happily at me and cracked his gloved fingers. One thing about Creole is that he is an expert at sewing, be they dolls, or in this case, humans. Must be all those years he did piano, because his fingers are like water, man. Smooth moving. If he wasn't keeping me trapped in here as his slave, I would strive to be this good. He laid the new skin on top of the rotting corpse and began to sew it to the old skin, humming a song as he did so, clearly lost in his craft. Kilpatrick came over soon to see what was going on. She raised a brow at the skin, it obviously now being a match for her daughter, but that soon changed when the skin began to mold
Yeah, he
and
likes
form
piano.
to the child's body.
I'm gonna
turning
start
the
taking
correct
piano
shade
lessons
and even
this week.
growing back the red hair she'd used to have. Creole stepped back.
Oh my
and
god, look,
nodded
it's
at his
almost
work,
done. It's almost
looking
done.
around the basement for something before looking to Kilpatrick.
Buttons or glass eyes?
He asked of her, throwing her off and causing her to take a step back at that. Obviously, she'd never had to consider a question like that. "Why can't you just give her regular eyes?" she asked.
Well, those are hard to come by. Where glass and button eyes are far easier to use. I assure you, dear, nobody'll notice. Well, with the glass option, of course.
He laughed with a smile. Kilpatrick wasn't amused, though. By her looks, she was the kind of no-nonsense cop. "Fine. Give her glass ones," she said, crossing her arms again, the gun on her holster moving a bit. I looked at it, but if the times the shop got robbed were any indication, there was no point in trying to kill Creole that way. With his answer, Creole reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 pairs of glass eyes. And carefully, he placed them into the gaping holes where the girl's eyes used to be. She was young. She looked maybe 7 or 8, just about
So
Olivia's
sad.
age. I was wondering what had happened to her, but the gaping hole in her neck kinda said enough about that. Shot, it would seem. By who, though? I was soon about to find out the answer to that question. But for now, Creole dramatically dusted his hands off and stepped back.
Now then, will her mother step forward and offer her blood?
He asked, a nice smile on his face as usual. Kilpatrick walked over and looked at her daughter on the table. The softening of her face obviously showed that Creole had done an incredible job at making her look just like she had when she was alive. Creole raised a needle up and pricked each of her fingers nice and deep. The crimson liquid dripped off of her fingers and into the girl's open mouth.
Ew.
It took a minute or two, but it was soon obvious that the body was starting to change. Before, she'd resembled a wax figure doll, but with each drip into her mouth, she gained color and started breathing. Wow, he really can grant any wish. Although this being
Everything changed in the
Creole,
Fire Nation
I was
attack.
expecting the inevitable.
Oh my goodness.
"Susie," the woman said, when the little girl sat up from the table, breathing rapidly, and looked down at her hands and arms, clutching her throat as she seemingly tried to stop the bleeding that had caused her untimely death. But then, she looked up at her mother and blinked a couple times. "Susie, it's Mommy," she said, getting on her knees and kissing her. "Mommy," she said in a soft voice. Her arms soon came around and hugged the woman. It was a tender moment, which lasted all of about 5 seconds. "Why did you kill me?"
I knew it. I knew she was gonna say,
the
"Mommy,
girl
why did you
suddenly
shoot me?"
asked,
I knew
causing
it.
me to raise my brow and look over at Creole, who was just smiling and chuckling up a storm as he backed away. I followed his lead and backed up as well. "What?" Kilpatrick asked quickly, pushing the little girl away from her, still keeping her hands on her shoulders. Her face was one of denial. "What are you talking about, baby? I didn't do anything to you." she explained, but the girl looked straight on at her with her glass eyes. I came downstairs while you and Daddy were fighting. You shot Daddy in front of me.
Oh
The little
no,
girl
mommy,
said,
why?
her voice deadpan,
Mommy,
sitting up more on
why?
the table and standing up on it. When I started crying, you shot me too,
Hello?
she said, holding an accusing finger up at her mother. You were supposed to be in bed, she said quickly, backing up into Creole, who chuckled as he clasped her shoulder from behind. I had to make it look like a robbery, she said, struggling against the unnatural strength of Creole.
Oh,
as
Creole
he
about
held
to
her.
F her up, bro.
You lied, Mommy. You always said lying was bad,
Oh no.
Susie said, her voice becoming more and more distorted, her mouth opening up to reveal row upon row of needle-like teeth. You killed me, and you lied, she said in a distorted voice, pouncing from the table and onto her mother. She took a big chunk of neck meat as her and her mother fell to the floor with a scream. Creole stepped over the two of them as Susie continued to chow down on
Trying
her
to decide
mother.
whether I should do like
She never said to make her forget about what happened.
yikes.
He explained with a chuckle.
I'm gonna try and do
tapping
like
me on the
either like a
shoulder and
basket for
turning
like
around
candy
to watch the scene with me.
or
You know,
a bowl.
Your parents seem really desperate to find you. Maybe they'll come in and wish for you back. Better hope they word it correctly.
He giggled, slapping me hard on the back and leaving me alone to watch the scene as he returned upstairs. I stood there and watched a little girl eat her mother for a good while, mostly because I dreaded returning upstairs. I was about to until something came sliding over to me and hit my nice dress shoes. I looked down, and I swear I almost lost both of my button eyes. A pocket knife. I looked back over at Kilpatrick's body and saw Mary already going through the dead woman's pockets. Keep it safe, she said, going back to looking for anything else. I bent over and picked it up, feeling the item in my hand and looking back over at Mary. I wanted to try cutting the ropes there, but I needed another opportunity where Creole wasn't in the shop. Guess I just have to play the waiting game some more.
What else should I draw?
I can stay sane long enough till that happens. Susie finished eating her mother and came upstairs with me. Creole ended up turning her into a voodoo doll and placing her on the wall with the others. Why waste precious materials after all? It had turned out that Kilpatrick's husband and daughter were killed in a burglary gone wrong, and looks like Kilpatrick had a fat life insurance policy on her husband. So much for serving and protecting.
Mama did get 8.
Since the cops are firmly not an option anymore, I'm still stuck in the shop. But at least I have a knife
It is
now.
crazy.
Not risking telling you guys where it is. Just know it's safe. And hopefully, I'll be able to do something with it. A small step towards freedom, but a step nonetheless.
Should I draw
I've
more
done
pumpkins?
a lot of horrible shit while
guess I could
working
draw
here
more
at the
pumpkins.
half-priced voodoo shop, but this tops everything before. I bet some of you have been wondering about that one girl
Like
who
another
came
bale,
and
another
asked for a
pumpkin?
love potion.
Yes,
Well,
I'm wondering
I'd
about that
forgotten
girl.
about her until she came running to the shop in the middle of the night. There was a loud thud from the door, followed by a bunch of panicked knocking. I popped my head from behind the counter and raised a brow. A positive to having the button eyes is that I've got incredible night vision. So, even with the lights off,
Yeah,
I was
more
able to see
pumpkins.
clearly the girl knocking on the door. I sighed and pulled myself up onto my feet and forced myself to walk over to her. "We're closed, ma'am,"
Should I give him
I told
a
her,
hat?
looking at her and noticing that she was covered head to toe in blood. Not an unusual sight at the shop, I have to say. I can hear you guys yelling at me for not helping her right away, and look, man, I'm a voodoo puppet. I can only give so much of a shit
Yeah, I'll
anymore.
do a hat,
I
and then
need
I'll
you to
add a
help me.
pumpkin and
I
another
came
veil.
here before and asked for a love potion,
details.
and ever since then the guy I've been dating has turned into an absolute psycho, she said, smashing her hands on the window harder and yanking on the locked door some more. I sighed, looking at her. All sales are final.
Not all sales
I
are
said,
final.
thinking for a second, and looking back over to the office and
That's
then back
funny.
at her. Sighing harder, I opened the door, I let her in, and I locked the door behind her. I turned the lights of the shop on and looked at her with crossed arms. Look, I can't do much for you. I'm in a much worse situation than you are. Screw you, man. My boyfriend just tried to chop my head off, she said. It must have been the first time she took a really good look at me, because when she looked at the stitches all around my neck, she took a step back. Okay, maybe we're in the same boat, she mumbled. Yeah, look, I can take you down to the basement to hide from your boyfriend, but you cannot tell my boss this. Otherwise, it will be very bad for both of us, I explained to her, walking over to the basement door and pulling on it, groaning when I realized that it was locked. I should have figured that. Okay, maybe not. Look, you can just chill here with me until the morning, and then we can both deal with whatever the hell happens.
No
I
refund.
said, just exhausted from everything. Being unable to sleep is terrible. Thanks. I'm Liz. I think your boss already said my name. She offered her hand, and I shook it, not minding the blood on her. I am Travis. So what's with the blood? You murder your boyfriend? I asked her, walking over to the counter and offering her the rocking chair I'm never allowed to use during working hours.
Dang.
She sat down and started rocking a bit. No, I did stab him a shit ton of times, but as I was leaving the house, he stood up and rushed towards me. So I just ran and ended up here, she explained, rubbing her arms and pulling away when she seemingly finally got a good look at herself. You wouldn't happen to have an extra change of clothes? She asked me. Yeah, in the basement,
Jacked up.
I replied. I looked around the shop. The voodoo dolls were obviously not happy that I brought somebody into the shop after hours. I responded with the middle finger to them. Judgmental assholes. We kind of just sat in silence until she finally broke it with a question I knew was coming. So what happened to you? She asked me. I looked at her with a raised brow and started chuckling. Clearly she doesn't read my post. I walked over to behind the counter and produced the missing person poster my parents had given King Creole. I handed it to her. That used to be me, I said with only a hint of sadness, crossing my arms and leaning against the wall next to her. She took it and looked down at it, then back at me. You look better with messy hair,
Wow,
she said,
she's a jerk.
causing the first genuine smile I'd had in a very long time. Ever since being turned into a voodoo puppet, my hair has been forced to be down and perfectly combed, opposed to my normal messy hair that I loved. Getting a compliment on my old hair was uplifting, to say the least. Thanks. I hope I can get it back someday. I sighed, looking over to the door and standing up straighter when I saw a figure shambling towards the shop. Hey, does your boyfriend usually walk on all fours?
Oh
I asked her,
no.
keeping my buttons trained on the figure shambling over to us. No? What kind of question is that? She asked, obviously confused. There was a loud knocking on the front door. She stood from the rocking chair and started to back up into me, smearing blood onto my suit. That's him, she said. Figured, I replied, as the creature started slamming into the front door. To say he was a human is like comparing me to a normal human at this point. His face was split straight down the middle, and he had plenty of teeth inside of the crevice where his brains should have been. He was also clearly unaware or uncaring of the fact that his guts were spilling out all over the sidewalk.
I know, and it
You
gross.
said you just stabbed him, I asked Liz as I leaned over the counter to search for a weapon. I had to make sure he was dead. Clearly,
What
I
the
should have done
frick?
more,
What
she
the?
said, producing a knife from the hoodie she was wearing. I looked at it, and then at her, and shrugged. Do you have any kind of magic shit that'll kill him?
What
She
the
asked me
heck?
as I calmly looked into the box of things I kept behind the counter. Look, I am just a slave at this point. I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm being held up by magic strings that disappear into the ceiling. Not much I can do in that department. I sighed, pulling out Officer Kilpatrick's gun from the box and slamming it onto the counter. Here, see if that'll help, I said, walking over to get King Creole out of his office. Liz, let me in, baby.
Ew.
I love you. I'm sorry about attacking you, the creature said, slamming its split head against the glass front door harder and harder, starting to crack the glass of the front door, causing Liz to quickly pick up the gun and fumbling with it for a second as she aimed it
You ain't no
towards the
babe.
creature. I knocked on
Monster
Creel's
BF.
office and waited for him, tapping my foot on the floor as I waited. Except he didn't come out, which was odd to me. I tried again, only for him not to respond either. Trying to open it, I found it locked as well, and I groaned. I know for a fact he doesn't sleep, since I don't sleep. So where the hell was he? Well, bad news, Liz. Looks like we're on our own with this one, I said, walking back over to her and going back to the box for something to arm myself with, showing Liz how to turn the safety off as she panicked about it not firing. How can you be so calm about this? She asked, terrified, only getting a shrug back from me. In my defense, at this point, I kinda expect this type of thing to happen. Finding the gun from one of the robbers, I checked the cylinder and found 3 bullets still unfired. Great. 1 for the monster, 1 for Liz, and 1 for me. That was a plus, I guess. All right. So we fire as many bullets as we can into him. Is that really our only plan? I asked her, sitting down on the rocking chair with a huff as I rubbed my aching legs. Standing up for so many hours really does a number on him. Unless you have a better idea, she said, still pointing the pistol towards the creature that used to be her boyfriend, who was rapidly putting more cracks into the glass door with each hard smash of his head. Well, at least he was dedicated to that. You guys gonna help us out? I asked the voodoo dolls. I turned my attention towards them, but as usual, they just gave me a blank look back whenever I tried to talk to them. Nope, I got no ideas here. I shrugged, clocking the hammer back on the revolver and aiming it at the creature. We would have had a last stand there if I hadn't noticed the voodoo doll template on the counter. Ever since being turned into a puppet, I'd forgotten about my little companion. He seemingly hadn't forgotten about me, though, as he was holding King Creole's key. I guess he wasn't such a little shit after all.
Wow.
Taking Liz by the arm, I pulled her over to the basement door and unlocked it, quickly pushing her in and walking in myself as her boyfriend broke through the door.
Oh
I
no.
can't see a thing, she huffed, flinching when the creature started pounding on the door from the other side. But I gave her a pat on the shoulder and took her hand as I led her down the flight of stairs, able to see rather well down there. Don't worry. If Mary can't get through that door, he sure as hell isn't either, I said, leading her to the basement and flicking on the lights. I turned around when she screamed at all the dead bodies and human remains. Oh, and Mary eating another customer.
Yikes.
Hey, Mary, don't mind us, I said, waving to her. He won't be happy that you brought someone down here, she pointed out, wiping her blood-stained mouth and looking at the girl I'd brought down here. When is he ever happy about something I do? I asked
Dang,
back,
you don't even care anymore.
reaching down and handing Liz some random articles of clothing. Plus, I don't even think he's here. I knocked and he didn't come out of his office, I pointed out, leaning against the cold stone walls of the basement. We'll just make sure she's out of here before he comes back, the porcelain woman said, going back to her meal with the same vigor she had before. Liz was obviously confused and scared, but I assured her that Mary was mostly harmless. Nodding, she went over to the corner and changed out of her bloody hoodie and jeans into another hoodie and jeans. Go figure. "What are we gonna do about Trevor?" she asked after a decent period of silence. I looked at her with my button eyes and sighed, running my hands through my hair and thinking it over. There was a chance that the voodoo dolls would deal with it, but I'd only ever seen them do anything after King Creole had been attacked by the rookie cop. I guess waiting is the only thing we can do. I shrugged. I really didn't have any ideas. If I couldn't get out of this place, how the hell am I supposed to come up with some kind of way to kill a boyfriend turned evil undead creature? She wasn't exactly happy with this option, but there wasn't much we could do about it anyway. "So, I'm guessing your parents didn't find you?" she asked me. The subject wasn't the most ideal thing I wanted to talk about at this moment, but I figured there wasn't much else to talk about. "No. Creole made it so the police won't investigate my disappearance. My parents came here to ask him about me, and I couldn't do anything to alert them that I was here." I sighed, looking away and over to the corner. "Well, if I get out of here, I'll tell him," Liz said, causing me to look over to her. Would she really do that? More importantly, what would ever happen after that? Creole wouldn't just let me go. He'd cause my parents more suffering, and by extension me. I still remembered his threat to me. No, I can't risk Creole hurting them. Me and Mary are working on a way to get out of here. I just need some time to think, I said, rubbing my face and scratching at my buttons. But right now, I gotta make sure he doesn't find you. Let's just say he doesn't like people knowing that Mary exists down here, I said, walking over to her and taking her hand as I led her back to the stairs. "I don't hear him," she whispered to me. And she was right. I didn't hear Trevor either. So turning off the basement light, we both started upwards towards the door, silent as we could be. Reaching it, I placed my ear against it, and I heard a wet smacking, the usual sound I heard when someone was getting beaten to death in the shop. "Stay here," I told her, opening the door quickly and closing it behind me. My hunch was correct when I saw Creole beating the living shit out of Trevor with his cane. His gaze turned to me, and his scowl quickly turning into a wide smile.
"Travis, dear me, I thought this disgusting creature had gobbled you up."
He chuckled, walking over to me and tussling my hair. Already, I could feel my body tense up and my brain lose control as the strings took over. "No need to worry about me, sir," I said happily, praying to whatever God existed for me not to say that Liz was hiding in the basement. He looked me over and looked over to the basement door. "No, please, no."
"You're hiding something from little old me, aren't you, Travis?"
he asked me with a smile, walking past me and over to the basement. I held my breath as he turned the knob, only for it not to open. He tisked and reached into his coat pocket, only he didn't find the key in there, or any of his other pockets.
"What the hell?"
he asked in annoyance. He looked over and grabbed me by my collar.
"Now you listen here, boy,"
he snarled, his yellow teeth sharpening back into fangs.
"You tell me what the hell you hid down there,"
he snarled, causing me to gulp and try once again to bash my face against the voodoo monsters, but it wouldn't work this time. "A girl, sir," I said in that stupid kiss-ass tone. "The one who brought this creature with her."
"Is that so? Then it must be Miss Elizabeth,"
he asked with a coo, pushing me away and producing a needle from his pocket. He inserted it and with a flick of his wrist opened the door, only to get met with a shot right into his face from Liz. The voodoo man stumbled backward and tripped over the bleeding corpse of Trevor. "Run!" I managed to choke out as the strings loosened, and I seemingly was able to have control over myself again. She nodded quickly and started booking it towards the entrance, only for her ankle to be grabbed by Creole's gloved hand and causing her to fall flat on her own face. I tried to assist, but the strings instantly took their hold on me once again.
Well, Miss Liz, seems your potion didn't turn out so well.
Creole chuckled, the hole in his head dripping with the black substance that usually came out of his mouth.
Allow me to remedy that.
He pulled her closer, and she shot him in his head. Travis, help me, she said, looking at me with sheer terror in her eyes. I wanted to force myself to move, but I was stuck there, just forced to look blankly at her.
Travis, get this bitch down to the basement.
Well,
I'm gonna teach her some respect.
well,
Creole said, as he finally managed to pin Liz to the floor and slap the empty gun away as she tried to bash him with it. The strings pulled tight once again. I fought as hard as I could, guys. I swear I did. But the strings pulled me over and forced me to pull Liz up and hold her against me as I began dragging her to the basement. Creole stood up, dusted himself off, and chuckled, walking along with me as I pulled Liz screaming and kicking down to the basement.
I know, isn't this wild?
I helped Creole strap her to the table. He scolded me for letting someone in after hours and deemed that the punishment I would receive was to help him with what he was going to do. He hummed and walked over to the corner of the basement to look for an item. He came back with pieces of porcelain.
Oh no!
My heart sank instantly when I saw that. He placed each piece onto her and mumbled something to himself. Liz began screaming louder as the porcelain began to sizzle onto her skin.
Oh
no! And soon morphed
no!
perfectly on top of it. He repeated this pattern, panel by panel, replacing every inch of her skin just like Mary. Guess this is what he did to her. When he finished, Liz was completely porcelain, but unlike Mary, she couldn't move. She simply darted her eyes back and forth, tears streaming down her shiny, pale face.
Jeez.
But he wasn't done yet. He looked over at me and smiled wide as he snapped his fingers. And before my eyes, she started shrinking, just like when he turned someone into a voodoo doll. In no time flat, she was the size of a porcelain doll, and he picked her up carefully.
Travis, Travis, Travis.
He sighed at me, bringing the doll of Liz over to me and holding onto it as he tapped my cheek with his gloved hand.
You shouldn't fall in love. You'll just end up in a million pieces.
He explained, dropping Liz in
Woo!
front of me. I screamed as loud as I could in my mind as my body just stood there, and I watched as she hit the floor. She shattered into a million pieces.
Oh my gosh.
A million bleeding
Oh
pieces.
no, not bleeding
Clean the
pieces.